Yo, can you guys hear me? I'm not hearing any of my sound, which is really weird. Like, I don't know why I'm not hearing sound. I don't know if it's like a setup I have or what. Let me see. Are you guys hearing me? All right, so you guys are hearing me. All right. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that. Okay. I'm not gonna worry about it then. Okay, welcome to Defense Diaries. I'm your host, Bob Mata, and this is day 7 of the People versus Richard Allen. Today was Bullet Day. I predicted that. I thought, like, because they're really doing this thing in chronological order. You know, they started with the day the girls go missing, and from that point, you know, we get into proof of life witnesses. You know, we get into the search, we get into proof of death witnesses, and then we moved into the investigation, and then it was the arrest, and then it was the search, and then it was the bullet. The bullet's what they found. So, they said something today. McClelland said something, and it was the bullet all day. So she was on the stand all day, and we're talking about Melissa Oberg, who was the forensic examiner, firearms examiner who made the match. So it was, I know Allie came live with you guys, kind of give you the morning, and it was interesting, and it was long. It was very long. It was a long day, you know, but what I'm going to say is that the jurors were amazing. Like, they just, the whole day was a really kind of dry, educational type day. The entire morning was really filled with, this is what we're doing, this is how we do it, this is, you know, this is what the terms that you're going to hear when we get to the important stuff, what they mean, what they reference. So it was a lot of, you know, firearms forensics tool mark 101 that took place like pretty much the whole morning. I'm curious. I really haven't been online to see what kind of the buzz is around this thing. It was, you know, I just, you know, going into it, let me just say this. Going into it, I really thought that there was going to be just kind of like a moment where they're throwing the like the image of what she saw that led her to the conclusion that they were a match, that Allen's gun and this Winchester 40 round or 40 caliber round were a match. And it didn't really happen like that. I mean, they definitely put up a photograph, but they hadn't explained like really what we were looking at. I mean, she went through this brief thing wherein she's talking about, okay, with my microscope, it's it's like a comparative microscope. And so I'll have the sample on one side and then, hey, say something because I'm not hearing anything on my computer.
Hey, babe.
Yeah, I can't hear you. I don't know what's going on. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna log off and see if that, like, you stay on, babe.
Okay.
Say hi to the folks, and I'm gonna, like, something's not working for me. I have no sound. Which, if it's just me, I don't care. I obviously want to be able to hear you. All right, let me dip real quick. Wait, no, you stay on. You stay on. I'm getting off.
I
Like, why would
know.
you pull yourself off?
I didn't. I
All right,
clicked the I
I'll
was
be
trying to get
back.
rid of the circles. I don't like the circles. I can't figure out why that happens now and how to get rid of them. But hi, everybody. Good evening. How do I get how do I get gifted a membership? Somebody, let's see if we can see who. Well, if someone gifts you one, that's how you get one. So it looks like everyone else could hear Bob loud and clear. Bob couldn't hear himself, which is, annoying. And when it's just difficult when we can't hear ourselves, I guess. Even though when we talk normally, you don't hear yourself. So, all right. All right. Well, it sounds like he's still having some difficulty here. But why don't we see? Let's see. Did he answer this yet? Did anyone ever check Bridge Guy's height in relation to the known bridge measurements? And did anyone measure his clothing size? Like some apps can do custom fit clothes. I mean, not as far as I know, the answer to that is a giant no. Um, but we don't know what the defense did, and we won't hear it until it's the defense's turn to start presenting evidence after the state's case in chief. Now I'm going in and out too. What's going on here? Someone else tell me if if my sound is off. All good now, Allie. I don't think I did anything different, but oh, I know why it was, because my daughter came down, so I was, like, hitting mute and answering her. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention, so that's why I was going in and out. She was about to leave, saying goodbye. So, I don't know, while we wait for Bob, why don't we get some stuff in the chat here about what you guys like, what is out of all you've heard so far, is there something that stands out to you that makes you doubt your previous position, whichever way that previous position was? I'm waiting for Mim versus Milling. I think we resolved the Mim versus Milling, Meg. Mim or mimming is like making your own little kind of homemade gun type scenario, something that's not mass manufactured. If I got it right. If I got it right. Justice for All can't even become a member. Not sure what's going on here. So Joanna says just corruption from the state. Susan says, "I don't love It's Over Twice." I didn't love that either. I mean, I can think of some, you know, other reasons for that. Uh, Lamsam or Eamsam, I don't know. Why were they reported missing so soon, like in 2 hours? They were reported missing so soon because all right, how about we for everybody who doesn't know, here is the abridged version of, Abby and Libby's story. So, it was a unusually warm February day, and the kids head off from school. So, Abby and Libby went to the bridge, dropped off there by Libby's sister, and they were supposed to be picked up by Libby's father. So when Libby's father got there, I literally thought I put at 3 he pulled up around 3:11 and was definitely out, up, and looking around by 3:15. When he couldn't find them, they weren't answering calls, it all happened that quickly. Yes, that's how it happened as quickly as it did. Dawn Burke, thank you. Gifted 10 Defense Diary podcast memberships. So somebody was asking, how do I get gifted a membership? It's if one of these 10s happens to land on you per YouTube's algorithm. So that's how that happened. Um, Unsolved Christianers is still confused about the video. Asher Jones, question: did defense open the door? Well, the defense can't. What did the defense open the door to the Odinist theory of the case? So now there's 2 things there. One is like opening the door in the legal term is when your opponent does something that lets something in that otherwise wouldn't get in, and they say, "Oh, you opened the door to it, now it gets to come in the legal world." But what you're asking is technically correct because here where the defense is trying to get the door open, so to speak, but they're trying to lay that preliminary basis that changes the judge's mind. So, um, I don't know if there's been a ruling that I haven't heard of. I know they filed a motion trying to say to the judge that they should be allowed to get this evidence on, but I don't know if there's been a ruling yet, or maybe it's been denied. Maybe somebody else knows something. I haven't looked at the recent filings. Joe Schmo, the whole black Ford Focus on Hoosier Harbor Store video westbound on Country Road 300 North is new to me. If Richard Allen admitted being there, why is the defense challenging that it was Rick's car? Well, it appears to me, and we'll have to hear this from Bob, that you can't tell what car that is. And Richard Allen said that he would have come in if he doesn't come in from the same way that from the country route, which is the route, for example, that Libby and Abby came in because the German family lives that way. That's the way they come in. If he came in the city way, which is what he said he typically does, he'd never pass that camera. So, not if you're parked at the CPS building anyway. You wouldn't get as far as the Hoosier Harbor store. In any event, um, even if it is his, I don't know why it couldn't be him leaving at 1:30. So, like, how do they know it's him coming versus going? But I think that there was one question that was up about the car, um, and I was trying to look up today what are the factory issued, rims on that car. I think that's, probably what we were looking at. I did some oh, no. Sorry, I thought it was on the car. I did some research on synonymous with there
Okay.
he is.
All right. I had to reboot. I don't know what it was. Something weird. Okay. All right. So let's rock and roll. What did you get through, babe? Like,
Nothing, I just chatted with the
no,
people
this
until you came
morning.
back.
This
Well, I
morning.
don't have any I don't have any facts from today.
Wait, you didn't do a Delphi live earlier today when I
Oh, yeah,
sent
I
you?
did, but
I'm
for now,
asking what you got through.
Oh, I got through everything, babe, that you sent me.
Okay. But what was the last thing? Like
So the
'cause I
last
don't think I wrote lunch break is what I'm asking.
Oh, okay. But we did have some questions. The last thing that I had
Mhm.
was it says it's the top of the page. No objection to video being shown is the last word. At the top of the page says question. Is there a hairline observed? Is the hairline observed? Page 14. I know that doesn't help, but it's
That
14
does not
pages
help.
in.
I see no objection to video being shown.
So the last word.
Oh, yeah, no, that was a question myself.
Ah,
So kind of like what I wanted to try to explain is that you know, you typically would expect an expert like this to get on the stand, and ultimately she spent the entire first half of the morning really just educating people on tool mark analysis and firearms examiners and what they do and why it's not junk science and why it's legitimate. And you're kind of waiting. They showed little videos of like little movies of how these Sig Sauers are made and what all the parts of the gun are, which is helpful. It's helpful, right? I mean, if you're not a gun owner, if you don't know a lot about guns, I mean, that kind of stuff is critical. And you can't assume that everybody on the jury is a gun enthusiast. So, it was helpful in that sense. It got really, it was long in the tooth. It really went on for a really, really long time. But at the end of the day, I'm expecting just like an hour presentation of the tool marks that she finds and why it's a match. And it's like that never had like she definitely put the image on, and that's where that hairline thing I'm talking about, because she uses a microscope, a comparative microscope, where she puts the item 16, which is exhibit 16, which is the bullet found at the scene, and then she'll pull up 316, which is, I believe, the gun. It's the gun's either 316, but what she does is she'll put the comparative under the microscope. She'll use the test round that she did, that she felt really matched the best. And then you'll have that hair aligned down the middle. And on the other side, she'll have the round that they found at the scene. So, and when you're looking at it, you see, and I'm sure you went through all that, right? You've got like three types of markings that she claims that she found. She found she had the ejector, and then hold on, I have to sneeze. I can feel it. It's coming. It's coming. I better not be getting sick. People sneezing and coughing all in the courtroom. It's quite a nightmare. So you went through that stuff, right? You got the right. I can't hear you, babe.
yes, I did. And we
Okay,
put
so
up
you
your
got
little
the
pictures. I just wasn't sure, was that the picture of Richard Allen's? Because then it seemed like they went through other weapons that they examined.
yeah, they did. So all right, so like that, I thought this might be a tough one for you to like be able to kind of go through, just in terms of you kind of had to be there for a lot of it. So, and a lot of people, like everyone around me, like I had to explain to Kathy and all that. I'm like, they're like, what? That Glock? Like, what is the Glock? I'm like, remember, this is testing that went on. Yeah, I take it every day, Pammy. Um, the testing that went on early in 2017, obviously they don't have Allen's gun, right? So they can't do any comparisons. They did have a Glock that they obviously had. They had another Sig Sauer, which turned out to be from the Weber property. I don't know if you remember. They ended up like snagging a gun from Weber's property that was a Sig Sauer, and so they end up testing against those. Okay, and and there was a third gun. So there was There was the SIG, there was the Smith and Wesson, and then there was the Glock. So there were 3 weapons that they tested against early. And at the end of the day, she ends up saying that because Luttrull, well, I'm jumping way ahead. That's why I'm kind of asking, like how much of into like the people that watched the live earlier, did you guys kind of feel like you were understanding what was going on in the room, like based on my notes? Because it was really
I definitely think it'll be helpful to us for you to just not necessarily, I mean, obviously going through your notes is going to trigger your memory, but for telling us more of like what you saw. But I think it's also going to get fleshed out in cross. So maybe start with that.
it does. Well, and that's where I'm at. So, but before I do that, so there's essentially you've got the tools that mattered to her and that mattered to us in terms of her examination were the ejector, okay, and the ejector is the tool that flips the cartridge out of the gun, okay. The other one that mattered to her was the chamber face, okay, which is at the front of the barrel, okay, and it's kind of like a U-shaped piece that like in this particular one she noted it because it has a point, so it goes kind of like it looks like if you were to draw a bridge. So this one end down here has a point, so it's like this, like, and it's U-shaped. If you guys can kind of envision what I'm trying to do. Let me try to. I want to try to draw it. It looks like this. Okay. All right. So it looks just like this. All right. That's what the chamber face looks like. So, and she claims that this point here, like the points at the bottom, okay, you see that they kind of look like the vampire fangs, that those can cause tool markings, like when a bullet's being cycled. Okay. And there's 2 things that you concern yourself with. The cycling of the bullet is when the bullet is taken from the magazine and then it's loaded into the weapon, and then it's prepared to shoot. So because you've got the slide on top. So the other thing that can happen is you can eject the gun, eject the casing by sliding it once to get it up into place. But if you slide it again, it'll eject the round that's been pulled up. Okay, so it won't fire it. So that's what we're dealing with here. So like when they say that ultimately, like I think what the state's theory is going to be is because we know that Liggett testified yesterday. He's like, okay, so I heard I heard the gun get I heard them slide the gun. Yes, like in the video. He's like, I heard him, he prepared it by sliding it the first time. And then what it sounds like they're going to try to say is that when the killer gets down to where the girls ended up dying, that he pulled the slide back again and it ejected the bullet. So you've got the ejector, you've got the chamber face, and then you've got the extractor. All
Joe
right. And so
Schmo's Joe Schmo's clarifying this that what you said in your notes before was rack that they Liggett heard them rack the gun.
right, like rack the gun. Right. So that's I'm trying to like use words that everybody knew, like if you're not a gun person. But yeah, so you rack it once, pulls the cartridge up. If you rack it again, it's going to eject it. So, but those are the 3 tools that you care about. So when they talk about tools in a weapon, they're talking about different moving parts within the gun itself. All right. So and they look at each specific tool. And for a situation where you've got an unspent casing, the 3 tools that you're going to concern yourself with are the extractor, the ejector, and the chamber face. That again, that piece, because she claims that when it goes up, sometimes because Andrea came up to me, she's like, am I like insane here? Or like, why would the cartridge portion, like meaning the casing portion where the gunpowder is, why would that portion touch that chamber face. She's like, wouldn't that be the bullet or the projectile part? And she's like, I'm like, that's the way it seems to me, but this lady's the expert, so I don't know. But she claimed that that could leave a mark. Okay. So ultimately, those are the three things that she focused on. She ends up showing the comparative mic thing or the microscope thing and is like, look, I see these three marks that you see up in this corner, which were made by the ejector. Okay, the most defined marks that I saw on the round in question, the round from the scene, are these marks that would have been caused by the ejector, which were on the head stamp portion of the back of the cartridge, on the back of the round. So when you look at the back of the round, you showed that little picture, right, babe? Did you show that little picture? That little stupid, my horrible drawings.
I did.
All right, so that thing, like,
Go up. There you go.
So
I
that
can pull it up. I've got your notes.
Oh, all right. Yeah, because I can never do the goddamn, like, I can't figure out which way is which. All right, so there. Okay, so that inner portion is the primer, right? That's what when the hammer strikes that, when the firing pin hits that, that's what ignites the gunpowder, and that's what causes the pressure to build within the casing, and that's what sends the projectile
Oh,
flying through the barrel of the gun. And then, so she claims that on this portion, those three marks that I show right there those were the ejectors, the ejector marks. So that was the tool was the ejector, and those are the marks that she said that were most prevalent. Those are the most defined marks that she saw in there. So that's what she decided to try to find, that there was sufficient agreement. Okay, that there was a match.
and when you say sufficient agreement, because I tried to look at some
Yeah, I'll get to it because that's the first thing that
that's,
Rozzi
like,
gets
between
into on the
people
cross.
in the okay.
No, it has nothing to do with people.
What?
That's the term. It's a term of art that they use in that
Oh,
particular.
I thought it was, like, the science.
No, that's that she says that there's like, so for her, she's matching, and she says that there's sufficient agreement between the ones on her test round and that one. Now, so when you're looking at that bullet again, okay, when you're looking at this thing again, when I first see this and I didn't hear this explanation, I'm like, wait a second. I'm like, this ejector left three different tool marks on it. Like, is that what it does? And then I come to find out that this round, the round that they found at the scene, had been ejected on three separate occasions. And we don't even know if it was from the same weapon. So this round had been around for a while. It had been in a gun before and it had been ejected two other times.
Why would that happen?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Cause like when I looked at it, I'm like, wait, like somehow an ejector left three marks on one round. That doesn't make any sense. So no, the
Somebody mentioned
reality
that in
is
the chat this morning. They were like, "Wait a minute, that was ejected 3 times," which I
correct.
I didn't know if
That's correct. I mean, like if it's ejected, I mean, you could just pick it up off the ground and like stick it right back in.
so doesn't that now, maybe someone else with guns can let me know, is that indicative of somebody with a malfunctioned gun trying the same like, otherwise, why is the same one getting tried 3 times? Like, "Let me try it again. Wait, let me try it again. Let me try it again."
Okay, so she ends up so ultimately at the end of the day, but what I'm saying is that, like, you're sitting here in this room all morning with her, and it led up until noon when we took our lunch. And like there was maybe 3 minutes spent with her putting an image on their slideshow on the big screen with this picture, like my shitty picture, except from the comparison microscope, where she has her test round and then this round, the round from the scene, like with a hair like splitting the screen. So you're looking at the comparisons on both. And they left it up for, and like she doesn't even go up to it and like really like say, okay, so here's the marks. This is why I think they look the same. And it's like I'm like, what? And then they turn the thing off. She's like, you can go back to your seat. And it was like, It was crazy. It was like it was crazy. So Rozzi's cross does do a lot to really kind of hammer it out. I mean, she's clearly a bright woman. Like she clearly, and she's very resistant to answering the defense's questions. She just would not capitulate to anything. Like she fought Rozzi on everything. She had her, according to my training and experience, answer like all those typical cop answers that you get. And she's not even a cop. She's really a civilian who happened to work for ISP. Like those lab techs aren't cops, but they're still state employees. So Rozzi gets up after lunch, and this like kind of picks up like right where you left off. And so you got to the last page where, she said that there was a verification process with her boss.
Nope.
Came
The
in.
last sentence that we saw was literally your question to yourself. That's where it
Okay.
ended.
All right. Okay. So when we come back in, we watch this video, and it looked like it was from, I could probably pull it up. It's on YouTube, but I wouldn't want to like have you guys watch it because it was meaningless. It was like literally, it's called the SIG Factory Tour, an insider's look at how pistols are made. And it was
Wow.
like 5 minutes long. It was like just like a real overview. And
Now
like,
I know why your notes are like no objection, because that seems like a strange thing to allow them to put on.
they had two, and they couldn't get the second one to work because that's what caused lunch to happen right when it did. They're like, oh, we can't get these videos to work. She's like, all right, I'm going to send them to lunch. Let's go to lunch. And by the time we came back, they'd only figured out how to get one of them on. So
the
that
jurors
was the only
presented
lunch.
pictures of the actual bullet with the or casing with the markings on it. Yes,
What?
no? The jurors were handed actual exhibit photos from her actual analysis with these markings on it?
No. So I mean, they were handed. I mean, they were handed a copy of. I don't think it was a copy of the slideshow. I think that it was her 14-page report, which when we get to Rozzi's cross-examination, I think you'll be surprised to know that includes 0 pictures of
I've
the
never,
comparison of the marks.
ever heard of such a thing in my life.
There's 0 pictures, and like she'll give her
Wow.
explanation as to why. All right, so after the movie, then Luttrull's like, okay, so
I
as a
wanna
fire,
research her name, please. I'm gonna look her up. I guess I'll wait
Melissa
till
Oberg.
after.
She doesn't even do this anymore. She
Yeah, but I'm gonna look
retired.
at all of our previous
Melissa
reports of other
Oberg.
cases. Melissa Oberg.
Yeah. So Luttrull asks, as a firearms examiner, let's like, what did you learn from that? And she says, well, it told me that the manufacturing process is such that I know now that the barrels are drilled and they're also milled, and that the firing pins can come from third-party vendors, as many of these tools within the actual weapon themselves come from third-party vendors. So they're not necessarily made at the Sig Sauer factory over in Germany. So she says that, I know it's not just one machine making all the tools, that there's multiple machines that make different parts of the tools, like the slide's made in one part, the frame's made in another, the barrel is something completely, having nothing to do with either of those. So she's like, because the manufacturing part of this is a huge part of the puzzle for them when they're trying to figure out. It's like what I'm always telling you, babe. I'm like, back in the old days when they used to hand make all the barrels, you'd get all kinds of defects in there, and those defects, when a projectile or a bullet goes through the barrel spinning, that's where you get those striations, you get those marks. And they really, every barrel was different because they were all handmade. None of them were going to be identical. You could really get a better understanding of which weapon a projectile went through, right? So that's not the case anymore. It's made it much more difficult for them. So now they really have to dig into the manufacturing process, and they rely on data and research and treatises that have been done by people that are doing studies or that go to the factories and they'll say this is their process, you know, like because they're always looking for, you know, individual classifications. Did you like? Were you able to kind of explain like so you've got your classification, you've got different types of classification characteristics, like so you've got your typical that like every one of these things will have, which is your just like your like she gave an example of if you're going to go buy a car that you know that's going to be your class characteristic, and then
I
and that it's general, it's a measurable feature that is pre-designed by the manufacturer. Every single one of whatever you're looking at is going to have it. That's a class characteristic that gives it's got very little value for them. Because remember, in terms of this type of science in this discipline, the goal is to exclude things. You're trying to say, okay, that doesn't match. You're not trying to, it's not an inclusion thing. You're trying to say, all right, I'm like that's excluded because it doesn't make clearly doesn't match. So with class characteristics, it's useless to them. And then you have subclass characteristics, and those they don't give you the ability to exclude, but they help narrow it down. So for instance, like when she did the Glock, even though she couldn't exclude it all the way, she had a pretty good idea. Like she didn't feel comfortable excluding it when she first tested the Glock back in 2017. She's like, it had some subclass characteristics that allowed me to know that the weapon that ejected that particular round more likely than not was not a Glock because there's these subclass characteristics. So what you're really looking for, what they're looking for, what examiners want are individual characteristics, which are defects of some kind, no matter how they've occurred, whether it was something during the milling process, it's some kind of imperfection, it's a mark or a feature produced by random imperfections or irregularities of tool surfaces. Okay, so these can be very important um, inside of firearm, or they can happen inside of firearm due to use, abuse, or corrosion. Those are three ways that individual characteristics can come about. But like if you have individual characteristics, that makes it much easier for them to be able to make comparisons because that's what separates it from the bunch. So, because if you don't have individual characteristics and you're left with only class characteristics and just subclass characteristics, they're never going to be able to say with any kind of reliability that this is a match because too many other weapons would match it. That's why you need the individual characteristics, especially in what they call consecutively made weapons, right? All right, so I feel like that's enough of an overview. Like, but I want you to just keep that in mind when you're talking about this type of science. It's a matter of exclusion. You have to exclude other weapons as being the potential weapon that caused those marks to happen. Okay, it's not like you're trying to. It's like you're trying to get everything away from it in terms of weapons that you touch and test till you get to the point where there's one weapon left, and then you test it, and you're like, all right, this one has the same individualized class, and like I can see it right there. All right, so Rozzi goes in, and the first thing he asks is let me find it. I don't know the cross. Like Rozzi's cross was longer than Luttrull's thing, but so she says that that there, like so at the end of the day she says that there are three different tooled areas that she found on the round. There was the ejector marks, the extractor marks, and then the chamber face mark. Okay, she said out of those three different tools that left marks, the ejector marks were the most prevalent on this particular round. Okay, and that she found sufficient agreement between the ejector marks from the round from the crime scene, and she found so she found sufficient agreement with the test round that she fired through. And when I say fired through, I mean fired through, and I'll get to it. Because what she did is she used 10 test rounds, okay, of like not all the same bullet. They all weren't like 40 caliber Winchesters. They were different rounds. She didn't like in Rozzi attacks it, but she's like, what I found is that when I racked the gun, when I was just trying to cycle to get him to eject, the weapon was not leaving, like Rick's weapon was not leaving sufficient enough, deep enough marks. So she ended up having to use a fired round, one that actually got pulled up and was fired, because that gave enough force to leave the marks by the ejector, which is weird.
Yet no pictures of this. Nothing.
Well, let me get to it. It was a real battle. I mean, like, Luttrull was fighting from allowing Rozzi, because they had blown up some demonstrative evidence that were the pictures from their slideshow. Luttrull, because here, let me just get into it. Let me just finish this, because that's the whole attack with Rozzi is. All right. So then the final stage, after she said that she found sufficient agreement, or identification, the final stage is the verification process, and that's basically a peer review. So there's a second examiner that will peer review it. She sends it out an email. Her email has no conclusions as to what she found. And then this person looks at it and says, all right, because there's either an exclusion, inconclusive, or agreement. That's the only three ways that these things can go. So she gets it back. This guy turns out to be her supervisor, Mark. I didn't catch his last name. He's also with the Indiana State Police. And he says, yeah, I agree. Like, I have agreement here. So he came up with the same result that she did. Turns out that we find out that she was standing right next to him when he was doing it. And that he did it for less than an hour or 2 hours or something like that. It was a very short, like, she took a couple of days to do it. All right. So Rozzi gets up and he's like, okay, he's like, sufficient agreement. He's like, is that a term of art? And she says, well, she's like, what do you mean? He's like, is that like sufficient? He's like, do you know what the word sufficient means? And he's like, do you know what the definition of sufficient is in the dictionary? And she's like, yeah, pretty much. He's like, well, it's defined as like enough. He's like, so what you're saying is like, it like when my client's like guilt is on the line here, you're saying that enough is adequate. And she's like, well, that's a layman's term. Like, that's how it's used. Like ours is a science term. Sufficient agreement is a term that we've developed that means like it doesn't mean enough. He's like, oh, so you're speaking a different language. You're not speaking English. Like, so just so we're clear, it's a different language. So she ultimately, so he kind of makes his point. She says it's more than sufficient in terms of layman's terms, but it's a science term. And then he talks about the video that we just watched prior to him getting up. And he's like, that video we just watched, he says there was absolutely no reference to ejectors, correct? And she says, correct. No, there was no mention of ejectors. And there was no mention of extractors or how they're made or when they're put in. She's like, no, there really wasn't.
What?
And then he said, and there was no mention of barrels. Correct. And she said, well, kind of. They showed how the barrels were made. He's like, yeah, but not the part that you're talking, not the bench, not the chamber face, like not that portion of it. Oh my God, is that true? Phil Lesh passed? Oh man. He's he's a Grateful Dead member. Formerly of the Grateful Dead. That stinks.
Yeah, moment of silence.
Thanks for that, Pitt. I did not know that. Okay, so he also said that the manufacturing of the tools themselves was not used. And he said she said that's true. That wasn't shown in the video. And he said, and it's true that many of these tools that are used in these weapons are made by other vendors and then they're shipped in. Right. So the significance being is that if you're trying to figure out the manufacturing process in order to determine whether or not things are done that may create a situation where you don't have consecutive production wherein things are being made consecutively one after another, like on a line, like jun, 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 like everything's the same. That becomes important to know. Like you then have to look into, okay, well, what about these three different other tools that are made in a different place? How are they made? Are they uniform? Are they consecutively made, or are they made individually? What's their process? So it's like you have to fit in all these pieces of the puzzle in order to get to that place where you can get an individual class. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Kind of like, I mean, like the individual characteristics. Remember, it's like it's basically a flaw. Like there's something that makes it different from everything else that's coming out on the line. So uh so she agrees to all that, and he says, okay, so you worked in a lab, right? And then he said, so with ISP, so he starts attacking her background a bit. He's like, what's the requirement to work for the Indiana State Police? Like, you got to have like a like a bachelor's. She's like, yeah. He's like, you have to have a bachelor's. And he's like, but it doesn't have to be in science, right? And she's like, no, it doesn't. She's like, yeah, you have to have taken some science classes or criminal justice courses, but you don't have to be like you could get in. He's like, so you could get in with a bachelor of arts, like, or bachelor of science, like sociology, or bachelor of arts sociology, and she's like, yeah, you could do that. um just to kind of point out the fact that, like, you don't necessarily have to be like a science person to get this gig. So so he says, and you're also not law enforcement, correct? You're a civilian. It's a civilian position. She says, correct. And then he says, and so he started talking about when she left. So, like, she was no longer, in this position. She wasn't even with the Indiana State Police. But when you're a forensic examiner like this, you know, like, you have the obligation to come back if there's still pending cases where you were the forensic examiner, the forensic firearms examiner for the Indiana State Police. If there's cases that are still out there. So she's testified several times since she left the position, and she's in a completely unrelated field. Like, doesn't do anything with bullets or guns or any of that stuff anymore. She left on good terms, though. Um, and then Rozzi asked her, he said, you were thinking about leaving that position as early as like 2018, right? Like, leaving the whole profession. She's like, well, it's a complicated answer. He's like, well, he's like, you said it in your deposition, right? Do I need to, like, refresh your recollection? So she, like, begrudgingly says yes. It crossed my mind. I was thinking about my 5-year plan. I kind of felt like I had hit the ceiling here and, in my career. And so I was thinking about other things. So then he says, so what is IBIS? And she says, well, that's the Integrated Ballistics Identification System. And he says, and what does that do? He says, and that allows you to view comparisons that have been done uh, state by state in different states. It's a database, right? It allows you to go in and look at other comparisons. Like, say you have a weapon and you're like, oh, I want to go see some other comparisons for, like, what ejector marks look like on a, whatever type of gun you're looking at, a Glock, and then whatever model. She's like, yeah, that's the thing. And he said, but that, he's like, that's not a definitive examination, right? You can't conduct an examination by looking at some image and then saying, okay, yeah, that looks like what I've got here. She's like, right, you can't do that. And so he says, when you're trying to, he's like, really, your bottom line. He's like, what you're doing 95% of the time in your job is like you're not typically looking at rounds that have been ejected, right? Is that safe to say? And she's like, well, I've done it. And he's like, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm saying what you typically do, what your typical job is that you're trying to determine if a bullet was fired from a certain gun. That is what you spend a bulk of your time doing. That is what most of your job entails, is trying to figure out if a bullet, a projectile that has gone through the barrel of a gun was fired from a certain gun. She's like, yes, that's really what we do. That's our main thing. And he says that so let me see. Wait, I gotta read this. There was not a time when you worked. Okay, so he says this sentence. He says, in all the years that you worked there, that there has never been a time when you worked there that you could say that a bullet matched a gun, correct? Like those words, like that's a match. It's a match.
I was just looking at the law on that, being able to say a match, but go ahead.
Can't say it. So
No.
she can't. So she says, well, yes, I did. And he says, what? And she says, well, I can't say with any kind of percentage of certainty. Like I can't assign a number to it. I can't say that this is 99% a match. I can't do that. So I have to say there's sufficient agreement between the two. And so, and then he goes into like, so basically what he did is he went through her, ultimately he went through kind of her CV, kind of like nitpicking. And, when you have an expert, you're typically, there's several different ways to attack them. First, you kind of go through, find any hiccups in their education. If you find any hiccups in their training and their proficiency testing and things like that. If you really want to dig deep, like what Allison's trying to do right now, where she's trying to find some of her former opinions that she may have made in court. And if you find that jurors had rejected it in other cases, because he basically says, she says that you said in your deposition that I did not make a mistake in the lab in all of my 17 years. He said, correct. And you said that. And she's like, well, I don't know if I said that. He's like, well, I'll refresh your recollection. He's like, here's your dep. And she says, well, I've never made a mistake in determining a comparison. And I'm frankly not aware of anyone else in my lab that has ever made a mistake during a proficiency test and they failed it. And so she's talking about not in real life, but when she's taking proficiency exams. Okay. And so ultimately he's like, so how many comparisons have you made? She's like, thousands. He's like, what? She's like, if you had to guess, what would you guess? She's like, I don't know, like 6,500 or something like that. So he says, we don't really know. And he used this term, the ground truth. She says that we don't really, he's like, so what that ends up meaning is that we don't really know the ground truth in any criminal investigation because they can never say that it's a match.
Wait, didn't she say it was a match here, though? She used the word match?
No, she didn't say it was a match. She said it was sufficient agreement.
Okay.
You can't say a match.
I know. I thought that she actually did at some point. I thought there was this whole thing about her saying it was a match. I thought it was literally using the word a match.
No, she said there was sufficient agreement.
Okay.
So then he keeps going at her, and then he says, and then he's kind of going through and he's attacking like their proficiency exams. He's like, isn't it true that, the first two companies that your lab was using for their proficiency exams, that One of them was kind of sketchy, and she's like, "Yeah, the one that we were using right before we switched to forensic assurance, there were some questions about whether or not their proficiency exams were too easy. So we really wanted to switch to somebody that was giving us tougher proficiency exams, harder ones to pass."
So all these I've never made a mistake on a proficiency exam was like during the years of the rubber stamping.
It's I think it sounds like a bulk of it might have been. Um, so she says that so then he kind of like he wants to make comparisons between DNA, and he's like, "You're familiar with DNA, right?" And he's like, we can't really compare what you guys do with DNA, right? Like he was
Oh
kind of
no.
he was kind of like, "Well, those are actual scientists, and y'all aren't like really actual scientists. Like anybody could do this." And so and he says that when you get to the point where like in kind of his interesting analogy was like, all right, so he's like, DNA is not comparable. We'll agree on that, right? To tool mark analysis. They're not the same things. Like you would never, and then he asked her this question, you would never tell a law enforcement officer that tool mark analysis is just as reliable as paternity testing, right? Like you would never do that. There's a little gnat in here that's driving me nuts.
And
And she said, "Yeah, no, I could not do that. I would not do that." Because he's like in paternity testing, they can come back with it's 99.9%. You're the dad. And then you go on to Montel Williams and you get outed for being a deadbeat and a sleazeball. Man, I want to catch this gnat. So she acknowledges, and then he asks, he's like, actually, there's a lot of professors and uh people that are interested in this type of discipline that support tool markings. But he says that there's also a lot of organizations out there that are very critical of tool markings. Isn't that correct? And she says, "Yeah, that's true." She says it's not a perfect science. And then he says, "So as a matter of fact, the President's Council of Advisors of
that's what I
Science and
said earlier.
Technology, PCAST, they're very critical of your discipline, aren't they?" And she says, "Well," he's like, "No." He's like, "They're pretty critical. Like they've published a report as to whether or not this is actually even a science." And then like, "Who is PCAS?" He asked her, and she said, "Well, it's a council of advisors that have been appointed to advise the president." So,
Does she finally give in and admit?
I mean, not really. Like she's like, there's definitely two sides on this thing. She said, like, she acknowledges that there's people that are poo pooing it.
Including the
You know,
president's council. Oh,
well, when Rosie tried to say that towards the end of the day, Luttrull got furious. He's like, "Oh, it is. They didn't say it's not a science." He was very upset. He was angry. He was very angry. Um, and she said, "Well, ultimately, she said that there were not enough black box studies. And black box studies are basically double blinds where you go in, you're taking the test, but you don't know the answers. You never find out what the answers are. And then the person administering the exam doesn't know what the answers are. So they consider it to be a double blind. And they never tell you what the answers are. They just tell you whether or not you passed.
okay. So earlier, babe, on the first when I did the morning session, I was giving them like the typical example of a black box because I thought that's what we were saying that they had, like where information goes in, do, you don't know what they're doing, and it spits out an answer. But they were using this differently to refer to a a double blind study.
Black box. Yeah. Right.
Okay. So not the black box that I described for you guys earlier.
No,
That's
it's
different.
different. It's different. So then she's saying, well, what are some of the critiques out there? And he's like, actually, there's like kind of a big movement that people in your discipline that are critical of it right now feel that it should all be done by independent labs that have no affiliation with law enforcement at all or the government, so as to not have undue influence.
So,
And
and I just want to tell you, the National Association of Attorneys General, that says that the Presidential Council issues a report arguing that ballistic testimony should not be admitted as evidence. Because I looked.
I mean, like, if you get some people on this jury, that like this shit can put them away, like it's a scary proposition. And he lays a trap. I could tell he laid a trap. I'll let you know when we get to it. I let the kids know yesterday that I think that Ajay laid a trap that's gonna get played out during their case in chief. Like she had this witness, like, basically just like, you don't want to make any changes to that report. Like, you're certain. They're like, there's nothing that you want to fix or change. And then she enters it into evidence. She's like, okay. So obviously the other shoe is going to drop at some point during their case in chief when their phone expert's going to testify. So, but this concept is true about having independent labs, because like Rozzi gave an example. He's like, so like when you get a kind of a referral sheet in, or they're like telling you like, okay, we got something we need you to test, like they'll often give you an idea of what the crime's about. Like, for instance, when you got this, you knew that this was something about, a crime that involved two young girls being killed, and that's like, he's like, you shouldn't know that, right? Like that's not something that you really need to know at all in terms of you doing your job. And she's like, you're right. Like, see, I don't need to know those facts. And she says, frankly, I try to avoid knowing those facts, because they can create a situation where there's undue influence, even if it's subconsciously. You're not sitting there like, oh, I'm gonna get the sucker who did this. But if it's floating around in your head that you're desperately trying to help law enforcement get the bastard who did this, and if you've got something that's a close call, maybe you go the way of, yeah, I find there's sufficient agreement, when it's really just too close to call. You know what I'm saying? Is there something you want to read there about it?
I highlighted it. I think everyone saw it. As described at greater length below, the forensic disciplines that PCAST recommends that, I'll say it again. As described at greater length below, the forensic disciplines that PCAST recommends that judges not admit to evidence are the following: 1, bite mark evidence; 2, firearms tool mark identification; 3, footwear analysis; and 4, hair analysis. By the way, PCAST also suggests that judges very carefully consider whether to admit DNA from complex mixture samples, and recommends that juries be advised that fingerprint examination has a high rate of error. And this is the National Association of Attorney Generals. I think this was a 2017, article. I mean, this has been an issue for some time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been under attack. It's like, in terms of science that you want to be able to rely on in terms of convicting people, you really want to be able to trust it, and there's just like, there's a lot of variables with this. And I frankly, I learned a lot because I was very diligent in my note taking, and I was really thinking about it a lot as she was speaking. Like everybody else was like a bunch of people. It was like me, Andrea, we're like kind of sitting there like really like, oh my God, this is interesting and shit. And we're like thinking about it, and like we're having these like interesting discussions during break, like, what the fuck, and then lawyer Lee's like, she's like, can you help me? It's like, I don't understand any of this shit, so I was trying to like give her And she's like, and I can't hear a damn thing. She's like, Lee was like, I had to order a hearing aid. It is really hard to hear in there. Really hard to hear.
I was gonna
Um,
tell you to get one of those special hearing aids.
yeah, I probably need one. Um, uh,
Joe Schmo says the baseline sufficient certainty in scientific analysis is the chi-square 95% confidence level. If she can't testify to that, she has no business being an expert. Lawyers don't generally know that.
okay. Um, okay, so he goes through he went through the nice thing with the PCAST, and then he gets to the um so he's still kind of attacking. He's like, there was a recommendation by the NAS that there's another study that needs to be done to assure the reliability of, tool mark examination. And he said that there was, so he starts going about listing a bunch of studies that have been done that are saying that it's not great. So he says, so as far as he's like almost, so he's like, but here's what I want to focus on. All right. So you rely on studies quite a bit in making your determinations as whether or not there's sufficient agreement. Isn't that true? She says, yes. And he's like, as a matter of fact, in this particular case, the two articles that you cited in your slideshow there, you relied on those articles in forming your conclusion here, didn't you? And she's like, well, I mean, I used them as a reference tool. He's like, look, he's like, let me ask you this. Did you actually read those articles prior to doing your work on this particular case? So ultimately she admits, yes, I did. I read those articles prior to. He's okay. So, but here's what we want to talk about. All right. In terms of like unspent ejected casings, okay, almost all research that's done, almost all studies that are done in this discipline and regarding this field focus on matching a bullet with a gun. Is that not correct? So everything at your disposal, all of the treatises, the learned treatises that you can look at, all the people that have gone out there and done the work and gone to the different factories and learned about the manufacturing processes and all that stuff, all of those are really focusing on matching a bullet with a gun, meaning that the bullet, the projectile is cycled through, has gone through the barrel of the gun. Isn't that true? She's like, yeah, that's true. And he says that the other studies that are not nearly as prevalent as those studies with the bullet going through the barrel of the gun are the ones where they're trying to determine the caliber of a bullet after it's been fired, right? And she's like, "Yeah, the feds have been trying to do that. They want to be able to try to figure out after a projectile has been shot if they can figure out what kind of caliber cartridge it was." He says, "Okay," and he's like, "But what we're talking about here, an unspent casing being ejected, there's nothing, right? There are no studies. There's nothing that you can refer to help you as a reference tool with ejected unspent casings." And she's, well, like she just like I said, she would never just flat out agree. It was always hemming and hawing, and so she said it's quite lean. It's quite lean, is the term she used.
So I'll give you an example here. This is in a Maryland case, June of 2024. So the expert there testified that um, casings and an unfired cartridge were cycled through the same firearm. Give me a second. So The court didn't strike the guy's testimony, but he gave a curative instruction. Mr. Richard Ernest, during his testimony, implied that the cartridge casing and unfired cartridge were cycled through the same firearm. The court, after a previous hearing, ruled that this opinion was unreliable. Because it was unreliable, the court held that such opinion was not admissible and could not be considered by the jury. The only permissible opinion that you, as the jury, may consider is that, in Mr. Ernest's opinion, the similarities he observed between the fired, and this is a fired casing, and the unfired cartridge are consistent with each other, and he cannot rule out the casing and the cartridge were chambered through the same firearm at some point in time. And that's even with considering it with a fired casing.
Okay. So he then focuses on, he's like, all right, this is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the difference between unspent cartridges and spent rounds that have been fired. And he said, so there's distinctions, correct, between those two things? She says, yes, there's definitely distinctions. And he says that fired round is subject to pressure, the pressure that's created by firing the bullet. So again, you've got the firing pin hits the primer, it ignites the gunpowder that's inside the casing, and then the pressure builds real quickly as the heat expands the cartridge itself, and it expels the projectile, the bullet, very quickly. We know how fast bullets are, right? So it's that kind of pressure that's popping that bullet right out of that casing through the barrel towards its target. So, and he says that, with you have an unspent casing that's ejected, you're not dealing with that type of pressure at all, correct? She's like, correct. And it's safe to say that when you have that type of pressure, that's going to leave more pronounced tool marks and additional tool marks, correct? And she says that's correct. So, and then he gets into it. He's like, again, there's very, very lean research on identifying a cycled round. That research is what helps drive error rates, correct? And she says, correct. And he says that there's no proficiency testing going straight to unspent rounds, correct? You're never tested. You've never taken a proficiency test on trying to identify unspent casings, correct? And she's like, yeah, that's correct. And he says, as a matter of fact, even in this case, and this is where it gets interesting. He says, even in this case, with the 10 rounds that you used, your 10 test rounds, wherein you had 6 rounds that you cycled by racking the gun twice and just having them eject, you couldn't use any of those because none of them left markings that were prevalent enough for you to be able to make a comparison, correct? And she says, that's true. She says, so as a matter of fact, out of the 10, you had to use one of the 4 that you actually fired the cartridge. You pulled the trigger, you fired the weapon, you picked up the casing, and you had to use one of those because you needed the pressure, the added pressure from the round being fired through in order to get the ejector in Richard Allen's gun to make ejector marks that were strong enough and visible enough for you to be able to compare.
All right, so I have a question. Maybe this is a stupid question. There were 3 separate marks. They were all different.
They were all from 3 that round. And like I said, when I looked at it at first, when I saw the picture, when they had it up for that brief moment of time, I'm like, okay, so like the ejector's leaving 3 marks on there, and then it turns out that those 3 marks were from that weapon or that cartridge being ejected on 3 separate occasions.
So it should the mark should look identical on each 3 times. If you're able to, you know, say there's sufficient agreement,
Well,
those 3
she's not comparing them to one another.
I know, but, what I'm saying is in theory, if they
You
were
mean in
all
terms of saying, like, was that thing ejected out of a different weapon? Like, you have no that could have been, like he could have had 2 40-round, because you can use a 40-round bullet or a 40-round cartridge in other weapons, like,
I
it
just don't
the
I guess I'm not understanding why anyone would ever pick up the thing and put it back
well, 'cause
in,
bullets are, they're not cheap.
but you're gonna keep
Cartridges, you gotta pay for them. Like, you're not just gonna, like, be like, "Ah," like, "I dropped it on the ground, I'm not gonna use it." You pick it up, be like,
yeah, but
"Alright."
then you accidentally fell out of the gun again and again. Just
Well, I
keeps
mean, these are ejected. They, like, there's a tool that ejects them out, pops them right
I
out.
just don't get why somebody would keep putting it back in to pop it out, to put it back in to pop it out, to put it back in to pop it
Well,
out.
but we don't know that they did that 3 like, it didn't have to be 1 second after another, like, "Oh, I keep dropping this bullet." It could have been, like, months apart, He's like,
Alright,
"Oh,"
so what you're saying is that people sometimes save and use the same bullet. This is my
"Oh,
ejecting bullet.
it's a perfectly good it's don't
No, but
like, it's a cartridge." Like,
I
the
understand,
bullet's
but
just
wouldn't at
the
some
end
point it
part.
get fired? Then wouldn't the next time you use it, it's gonna get fired? Like,
Unless it gets ejected again, which this particular bullet got ejected 3 times and
alright.
ultimately was never fired. It was found having been ejected 3 times during the life of that little cartridge. That little oh, and by the way, I keep meaning to tell you that a Tic Tac, we call it the alley Tic Tac. One of the Tic Tacs you dropped is still under the chair right in front of us, and we always look at it and smile and like, we're gonna draw a little face on it. Because they clearly never clean the courtroom. So that little Tic Tac's been there all week. And every day we come in and we say, like, "There's Allie's Tic Tac. It's so cute." She's like, Kathy's like, "I want to draw little ears on it and a little face." So, um, so
So
I
I
like,
wanna ask the civil rights investigator, so wouldn't it be likely that that round that you ejected or whatever and then put back in would be one of the next likely ones that you would fire or
not
somehow
necessarily, not if he's got a box of rounds and he's just picking the rounds up and filling his magazine up. You know what I
it
mean? It's
seems like
like,
the odds are
why does
against
that
you.
seem, well, you never have shot a gun in your life.
So
So, like,
no
what
one
seems
else
odd
thinks
to
it's
you?
odd that it's the same bullet gets ejected 3 times and then never used. It
Well,
seems
he just told you, he's like, if you keep your gun with one in the chamber, which many gun owners do, unless they're putting it up and storing it, but if they use it frequently, like there's typically one in the chamber. So, and if he's gonna hand it to somebody else, he'll rack it and clear it, or if he's gonna clean it, if he's gonna disassemble his gun and clean it, like there's reasons to pop them out, but like that's what I'm saying.
if
Like
you use it that often, I
you're not
suspect it's
gonna throw a
fired.
perfectly good round away when you
No,
get
I
your
know, I'm
gun.
just expecting it to be fired before you eject it 3 separate times. Oh, just got lucky, it was like that same bullet was the one that was there again to be ejected.
Here's another explanation for you from gun owners that know.
Okay, there you go.
Right. So, um,
Thank
so
you, all of you, including the firstish Noel.
we got an amazing community here. See, they teach, they
They're like,
teach.
"This chick's thick, she just keeps."
No, you don't know. They're like, you're
I
not a
know, I
gun
just to
person.
me, I thought, but
Definitely
I
not
get it if
thick.
you do that multiple times in a row, then may it just seemed like, you know.
Nah, it's just like, rounds cost money. Money's tight these days. And she's a lady, by the way. There you go.
What? No.
Look, yeah, civil rights. Yeah, like,
Oh,
look
civil
at
rights
you,
lady. Oh, I thought that was the
civil
excuse
rights
for me, and I was like,
investigator.
"That's not a good excuse."
Civil rights investigator. That's like the old surgeon riddle, right? Like, you had
Yes.
a little bias there. Um, okay, so he says your conclusion in this case comes from a test fired round, not ejected. I think that that's a big problem. I do like The defense has their own expert that's going to be coming on. We all know that their metallurgy guy is not going to be able to testify, but they have their own firearms examiner that's coming who's going to testify. So she says, out of trying to get away from reviewing the narrative of what crime occurred, and this is what I was saying. She's like, our office in general is trying to get away from reviewing the narrative of what crime occurred prior to examination so as not to cause bias. Because Rozzi brought it up, that point that I was talking about earlier, which makes sense. Like, you don't want that rattling around, in there. Like, and look, my point about this is that there could be some value in it for the jury because we don't matter. I mean, we can all talk about it and blah, 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 blah. But there could be some value in it for the jury. But my point is that it can't be the thing, in my opinion, that convicts Rick Allen. Like, this ain't it. This can't be it. There's just too many X factors. There's just like it's not something that you can convict people of crimes on where you can feel super confident that, man, that's like some in stone shit right there. You're done, son. Like, there's no explanation. Like, you had to have been there. That came from your gun. That's it. Like, I feel like there's no other, you know what I mean? It's like, because when I get through this, the thing that Andrea and I kept talking about, I'm like, where is the comparison? Like, what should have been done leading into this, and you and I have talked about this a million times. Why aren't you buying 10 of the exact same gun that Rick Allen owns?
Yep.
Okay, you're getting a 2001 manufactured Sig Sauer. I think he's a 239. And you're ejecting rounds out of all 10 of them. Okay,
Right.
including, and his is included in one of those 10. And then you're making the comparisons with all of those exact same weapons to see if you can really tell the difference. Trying to tell the difference in excluding other guns that are made by other manufacturers doesn't do shit for me, because Sig Sauers are very popular weapons. Law enforcement all over the country uses them. Homeowners that want to defend their property and their person, they buy them. It's a very popular gun.
Or at least an expert who tested it and says, I
Right. And
did
then,
the there's no these are all different. Here you can see this one's different than that one or whatever. Yeah, it'd
right.
be nice to give an expert a pop quiz in court, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Mm.
So, and then so he says, out of the 3 ejector marks, the 3 extractor marks, and then the in chamber marks, he's like, out of all those, I mean, your report says that there's that with even with those, that was not a wealth of information in order for you to make this determination. And, she kind of like hems and haws a bit, and then ultimately is like, I mean, it's like, would I have preferred to have more? Yes, but it was enough for me to make the comparison. He's like, but there was not nearly as much as you'd find with a fired round, correct? She's like, that's absolutely true. I'd have much more to work with a fired round. And then, okay, so then
Can I
he
ask
talks
you
about,
a question?
uh-huh,
Based on like part of the whole thing about Tobin not being allowed in was like you're gonna be able to establish all this on cross-examination. So they weren't really able to bring in the president's counsel thing, but do you think that she admitted enough criticism of the science that the judge would say, well, pretend it was another judge, that was sufficient? Because I was saying earlier, if she's up there saying there's all these studies and she's read reports that has, validated that the discipline, still works and these kind of comparison can be made, that the state might have opened the door to get Tobin in. But now with them getting some of that out from her in cross-examination about uh, the discipline being criticized widely, that door might have closed back up. Is that what you kind of see with this cross-examination?
I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know that the door was closed, but I think that Rozzi probably did enough to have some jurors curious as to the the efficacy of this particular discipline. Like I just like this
It'd be
isn't
enough for this
DNA.
judge.
I thought his example, his hypo, his hypo of comparing paternity tests to this and like saying, well, you'd never tell a cop that you could trust this like you could trust a paternity test, right? Like you'd never say that to a cop, right? And like I thought that was an effective way to kind of like put in
Drive
the
the point
jurors'
home.
minds that okay, there's really powerful science that you can really hang your hat on in terms of coming to a conclusion as to innocence or guilt in terms of a certain piece of evidence. And there's stuff that you can't hang your hat on, but that you can use it and you give it the weight that you deem appropriate, which is what Indiana does. Like this shit gets in Indiana. Like they don't do like they're like these kind of like attacks on the science, which typically happen in a Daubert hearing, where you've got the defense attorneys or sometimes even the state, if the defense is trying to bring something in, attacking, saying that this is not reliable. This is not giving anything to the jury that they can really use and rely on. It's just not reliable science. And I mean, with this, there's a question of whether or not it's even actually science. When you think of science, you think of equations and numbers and things like that. This is like people looking at two things and deciding that they look the same. I mean, at the end of the day, under microscopes, like I mean, I guess because they're using a microscope, they think it's science. I mean, it's really just like trying to compare two things to give an educated guess that yeah, it came from the same thing, but you can't say it's a match. You can't put a number on it. So, I mean, so it goes to weight here, meaning that it's not an admissibility thing. They're going to always allow it to come in, and then they're going to tell the jury that you, as the trier of fact, are the ones who are,
Hey, you're muted.
oh, how much value do you give that information that you learned? And that's what weight is. So, he starts talking about the 6 hour, and it's a possibility, potential of an agreement or identification. So he says in October of 22 that you test fired 4 rounds and you cycled 6 rounds. And she said, he said, and you did not examine the rounds prior to firing them, right? Like you didn't like the test
I
rounds.
read in all those things, that's like the first thing you're supposed to do
Yeah, the
before you
test
test
fire
fire.
round, she said she did not examine them prior to
Oh,
firing.
no, 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 that's a giant no-no. I was reading all the standards today.
Yeah.
Hmm.
She said, I looked at them, but I didn't microscopically examine test rounds before firing them. I put a big star by it. I'm like, ooh, that doesn't seem right. So this is where it gets weird. This is where I'm like, what in the world is going on with this evidence here? So Rozzi, like I said, he had printed out big demonstrative like photographs of the pictures that Luttrull had used in his slideshow. And so Rozzi goes to start like first the judge is like, those haven't been entered. Make sure the jury doesn't see them. And he's like, they already saw them. They were in Luttrull's like slideshow already. And she like just kind of sits there and looks at him. So ultimately they go up, they have a sidebar, she turns on the white sound, the white noise, and then like she's like, whatever, like I'll let you get him admitted. So he's got EE through PP are all admitted, and they're in these big pictures. And so he's like, all right, so EE is just a picture of the Sig Sauer, the weapon. FF is a picture of the Sig Sauer in the closet where you found it during the particular search of the house. And then he's like, GG is the Winchester. And again, it's and it refers to the closet. 316 is the Blazer round, or EF. GG. HH is the Winchester. II is the Blazer round, which was another round. They found 2 magazines. Magazines are the clips that hold all the cartridges in them, the rounds in them. So they had found 9 in one and 8 in the other. So they had 17 of those. And then he's like, JJ is 2 different magazines. The 2 magazines, and he's like, the next one, KK, is the rounds taken out of the magazines. And then he talks about item 16, and he's like, 16 is the actual, and it's exhibit 16, and that's the actual round that was found at the crime scene. So that's the Winchester 40 caliber Smith & Wesson cartridge. And he says, you agree, you'd have to agree with me that Winchester, who's the manufacturer, that is a very well thought of piece of ammunition, correct? She's like, well, there's a lot of companies that, like, she would just never say correct. He's like, yeah. He's like, well, you would agree that there's, they manufacture millions of those cartridges, right? She's like, they make a lot of them. And he says, he's like, then there's multiple markings on the round, right? And he said, could it have been cycled? He says this could have been cycled multiple times, correct? And she says yes. And it's possible that the round could have been cycled in multiple weapons because there's 3 ejector marks on it. And she says she's like, I mean, maybe. I mean, as long as it fits in the weapon, it could have been cycled in multiple weapons. And he says there is no way to know. There's no way to know when that round was cycled. Like, you cannot say that round was cycled the day of the crimes. Like, you can't say that. There's no way for you to figure that out. Correct? It's impossible for you to know that. And she's like, I could never tell you when that round was cycled.
But because it's found on the ground, you almost think it had to have been cycled right then.
Or it dropped out of somebody's pocket.
Okay.
Right? I mean, it didn't have to be cycled. So then he says, and as a matter of fact, that round, the Winchester round in question found at the scene, had been cycled on 3 separate occasions. That's where it finally comes out. I kind of let the cat out of the bag with that.
Everybody figured that out in the live when I said there were 3 ejector marks. They're like, oh, so it was cycled 3 times?
Right. Well, gun people did.
Right.
Not everybody's gun people. So, like, Lawyer Lee, she's
And
not.
me.
Allie Mata, she's not gun people.
I was like, oh, it made 3 marks. Okay, it makes 3 marks when it's cycled.
So it says, and he says, you cannot say with any certainty where this round came from before it got to you, can you? And she says, no, I mean, I can't. He's like, it was delivered to you, and you can't say with any certainty where it came from, right? Other than the fact that somebody dropped it off to you. She's like, well, it was in a package. I'm like, but prior to that, you have no, like, personal knowledge of where that round was, right? She's like, no, I can't say that. So then he starts going through her report.
All right, I have to interrupt you, babe. Okay. Everybody's saying there's a verdict. I don't know if that means, like, right now the verdict is just
Sarah
coming
Boone?
in. And do we want to break? Because I'd love to see it.
Yeah, throw it up. Might as well.
All right, let me.
Like, I'm supposed to be going with Vinny at 9, but they're like, she just texted me. She's like, the verdict, they're waiting on a verdict. So I don't know what this is going to mean for me on Vinny. Maybe they're going to want to talk about Boone.
All right, well, I'm going to pull pull it up and then we'll put it on when it comes in.
Yeah, just let me know because like it'll probably take like 10 minutes or so. All right, so at this point, Rozzi starts going through her report. He's like, so you produced a 14-page report regarding this, right? And then he starts flipping through it. He's like, okay, so page 1, there's no photo of the round here, right? Page 2, no photo of the round. Page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there's no photo of the round. Correct. She says 8, that there's a you have a couple of microscopic images there, right? She says, yeah. Said 9, there's a couple of microscopic images, right? And he says on pages 11 through 13, there are no photos of 316, which is the comparison.
Jeez.
Like, so she prepared a report, and nowhere in that report does she actually put the photograph that shows her work, wherein it is a photograph of the microscopic comparison mic, or the microscope, the comparison microscope, where it shows where she's decided that it's a match, that it's not a match, but that it's sufficiently in agreement, like that it's. So in her entire report, she doesn't have a picture of that. He's like, so as a matter of fact, I asked you. He's like, there is not one photo of 316 in your report. And we're talking about exhibit 316, which is that picture of the comparison microscope with the hairline, and then the test round, and then the round they found at the scene. There's not one picture of it in her entire report. So I want you to imagine that. Like they're bringing this evidence in at trial, and her report that everyone relied on, the defense, the prosecution, doesn't have one photograph. So he says, I asked you for your bench notes, right? Because after I got this report, I'm like, okay, hold on. All right, where's the comparison? There's no pictures. There's no picture of the compare. So he's like, I called you multiple times, right? I kept asking you. I'm like, can you send me the comparison? Like, I want all your bench notes. I want to see all your work. Because like what I'm looking at, like I'm at a loss here. And she says, yeah, you did call me. He's like, so you didn't give those to the prosecutor either, right? Like the prosecutor never got a photograph of 316. And he said, what about when you gave the certificate of analysis? Did you give a copy of that to them then? And she says, no, I didn't, because photographs, I don't want jurors looking at photographs, because that's not what I made my findings on. My findings aren't based on a photograph. And like there were many other things involved that I can't take pictures of in one photograph. So she's like, I think it creates a situation where it's unreliable for the jurors to look at that photograph. It's not fair for them to look at it. So like, I mean, essentially you've got a discipline here where you've got
Your black box scenario.
Yeah, you've got experts coming in and just saying, you just got to trust what I'm saying. I can't show you the work because I'm afraid that the work is going to give you the wrong impression, and you're not experts, so you can't look at it. I don't want you looking at it trying to say, well, they don't look like they match to me, so you're just going to have to trust me. Like that's what we're left with this expert.
Please tell me, did he ask her how many
this.
other times she's done that, not produced a photograph? Does she never produce?
She never does it. Says she never does it. So he says, okay, so let's talk about so 315, exhibit 315 is the round that they found in the Hope box. Okay, so the 40 caliber Hope box round. And he said, when you got that from law enforcement, that had no prominent ejector marks on it, correct? And then he said, when you got 316, which is the round in question, exhibit 316, he's like, that did have prominent ejector marks, correct? And
Yes,
he said,
both of those.
so he said, at the end of the day, you've got 2 rounds that are the state's alleging came from the same person, but one didn't have any kind of prominent ejector marks on it, correct? And she said, yeah. He said, so 315 and 316, the 2 rounds that are both 40 caliber Winchester rounds, were not helpful in terms to cross-reference one another. Like, you couldn't use the one round to say, okay, well, they were both in his house, they were both in his possession allegedly at one point, and now I can check with these 2 rounds to see if there's sufficient agreement. So she says, right. She's like, that's correct. So he said, when you got the actual firearm, like, so when you finally got Rick's Sig Sauer and they dropped it off, first thing he did is he made sure that, it was safe, that it wasn't loaded. She's like, that's correct. And then so you got your test fire rounds out of the test fire box, right? And then you had 6 cycled rounds that you used. And you found some extra marks on some of those. You found some extraction marks on those, and you found no ejection marks, correct? So, and he's like, so ultimately, because you found no ejection marks on that, and that was the most prominent mark on the bullet from the crime scene, you couldn't use any of the cycle rounds, which is you, in theory, duplicating what happened when this round was ejected. So he says, ultimately, then you fired 4 rounds, and you had to use one of those rounds to reach your conclusion. And she said, well, yeah, she said there was no sufficient agreement. None of the tested cycled rounds were used in her analysis because there just was no sufficient agreement. There was no way to do it. Like, it wasn't like, and to me, that's kind of like the thing, isn't it, right there? Like, if she's doing the thing that is supposed to have happened, that ejected the round unspent, and she does it 6 times with 6 different test rounds, and none of them left marks prominent enough for her to be able to use in a comparison.
Isn't that the whole thing?
Isn't that the whole thing, or am I just nuts?
I feel like it's the whole thing. So we're gonna need somebody who understands something different to tell us that that doesn't track, because so I am now 150% confused on what she made her comparison on. I assume that's what it was. So she's saying she had to fire the gun in order to get similar markings.
She had to fire the gun to get adequate enough ejector marks in order to make a comparison with that weapon.
Okay, that right there to me should have been the basis for them to get it excluded. Maybe that was what was listed in their motion.
That's what she's saying. It goes to weight.
How? She could not.
Because in her world, whether or not the weapon is fired, just in terms of how it operates, that's why I went through this. So in her world, it doesn't matter whether it's fired or not, because either way, it's
All right, I'm gonna wait till we get to the jury questions.
it's extracted and it's ejected. So if it's fired, the casing is ejected. It's always going to get extracted because it's pulled out of the magazine. You rack it, the extractor pulls it out of the magazine, and then if it's ejected, the ejector's flicking it out. If it's fired, the ejector's flicking it out. So in her mind, there's no difference, but there is, because of the pressure, because of the amount of pressure that happens
But like you
when you
said,
fire around. I
if
can't get this
that
math.
gun made those markings by just ejecting it, then that gun should make those markings by just ejecting it. It did it 3 times.
Right, that's the thing. The fact that she did it 6 times, not one time did it make a mark prominent enough for her to be able to make a comparison. To me, it's open and shut. But I'm a defense lawyer. I realize that. Maybe, maybe I'm being biased about it. I don't know. To me, there's no way
How
in
long
hell
have
you
I
can
been
convince
muted? I've been
somebody
over
on
here
that. There's
screaming.
no way.
So I've been over here screaming. I didn't realize I was muted, and I
No,
agree with Baby Fishmouth, like, 150%. I don't get why she was allowed to testify, that that
it
that
goes to weight.
it but that she can't replicate it. What the hell? So, did he ask how many times she has analyzed or given an opinion on an unfired casing?
I think she says she's done it once before.
So, did he ask her in that other time, were you able to replicate it by just cycling the bullet?
I don't know. Like if I read it, it happened.
Please tell me the jurors asked questions. I'm
Well,
not
they asked
asking.
there was two of the dudes asked a bunch of questions.
I get a good
The
feel
problem
with
with
the
the
dog.
questions is that Judge Gull reads them so fast. I can't write fast enough to get all of the questions written down. It's super annoying. All right, so um okay, so she test fired the 4 rounds and she examined them. The tested fired 4 rounds were uh he asked her if she examined them under the stereoscope. She said she did not examine them. So he said back in March, um, let me see. Hold on. Did not document that test not being microscopically examined before. Okay. He said back in March when I was doing your deposition, you didn't tell me, or you didn't document that the fact that you had not microscopically examined the rounds you tested them, before you test fired them. She's like, I don't know. So he refreshed her recollection. It's like, apparently not. I didn't tell you, and I didn't document it. He's like, do you think that would have been something that you probably should have documented? That might have been something helpful in terms of me speaking with my expert, having that bit of information in terms of the efficacy of your report. Like, is that something that's legitimate? So he says that there's no agreement between the chamber marks and 16, which is the actual round. He says there's no similar chamber marks uh, in comparison to the test fired rounds. So chamber marks aren't a thing. So is it possible, he asks, that the difference between the test fired rounds and item 16 um, so he says, is it possible that the differences between the test fired rounds and item 16 is that one was cycled and one was fired? Is it possible that there are differences between the test fired rounds and item 16, that one was cycled and one was fired? And she said it's possible. There could be a difference. Oh, wait, turn the sound up. Where is she? Judge is on the bench. Judge is on the bench. We got a verdict in Boone. Let me guess. Guilty. You're muted, babe, in case you're trying to talk.
Let me know if you gotta boost it. Doesn't matter anymore.
Huh? Where's the sound?
You can't hear it?
No, none of us can hear it, babe.
Still?
Suspects will stay seated.
There we go. Got sound.
Would you mind everybody in the
Turn it up.
that there should be no emotional
I
reactions to the
was
verdict?
just about to address that, sir. Thank you very much. All right, members of the jury, my understanding, or members of the gallery, good evening. My understanding is that the jury in this matter has reached a verdict. I don't know what it's going to be until it's read. If you are unable to contain yourself emotionally and you're going to react in any way, be it in joy or in sadness, I'm going to ask you politely to excuse yourself at this time. There cannot be any emotional outbursts when the verdict is read. Does everybody understand that? I see everybody nodding their heads. Okay. State, are we ready to bring in our jury?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense, are we ready to bring in our jury?
Yes, Judge.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our jury. Everyone will remain seated.
I was trying to find you, Bob, on an old recording of 2 days ago, recording of TV. So I was going through it, and I
You sound
and
weird.
it's still talking
Some,
about Boone, and
some,
I'm like, 3 of the
sounds-
lawyers there, other
some,
than
wait,
Vinny.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Your mic sounds whack. Are we live?
State, do you recognize our jury?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense, do you recognize our jury?
Yes, sir.
All right, members of the jury, you may be seated. Thank you. Members of our jury, good evening. I understand that you've come to a verdict in this case.
Yeah, guilty as hell.
If you could
Bye.
please hand the verdict form to the
Bye,
deputy.
Felicia.
please. Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk, if you could please publish the verdict.
In the Circuit Court of the Ninth Judicial Circuit and in Orange County, Florida, case number 2020 CF 2603, the state of Florida versus Sarah Boone. Verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the second degree as charged in the information. So say we all, dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, on this 25th day of October 2024. The form has been signed by the foreperson.
Madam Clerk, please poll our jury.
Juror seat number 1, is this your true and correct verdict?
Yes, it is.
Juror seat number 2, is this your true and correct verdict?
Yes, it is.
Juror seat number 3, is this your true and
Yes, it
correct
is.
verdict? Juror seat number 4.
That guy- that guy was like, yes, it is.
Juror seat number 5, is this your true and
Zip
correct
that man in the
verdict? Juror seat
suitcase.
number 6, is this your true and correct verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
Members of our jury, again, I want to thank you for your time, your sacrifice, and your attention in this matter. I know that we spent almost 2 weeks together and it was not taken lightly, and I really appreciate the time and the effort and the sacrifice that you put into this case.
Sound's gone. What happened to the sound? You muted it. I can see you muted it on the screen. You're muted. The sound's muted. Wow, you're having a real Bob.
You guys want to keep listening is my question.
No, I don't. It's like that was the most foregone conclusion, verdict in the history of verdicts, except for maybe Murdoch. That was a
Yeah.
pretty foregone conclusion. Like what? Okay, here's the deal. All right, don't be an idiot. If you ever get arrested like Sarah Boone and they offer you 15 years when you've zipped somebody in a suitcase and
What's
you
the
have it
difference
on
for second
video,
degree?
just take the deal. It's like the minimum she can get is 22.5. Like 22.5. That's the minimum you can get. Wait, there were people in Melanie's chat that thought she was going to get an NG.
I'm telling you, 3 lawyers on Vinny all said they thought she was factually not guilty.
What?
I mean, she was abused by this guy. She
So
didn't.
what? You don't get to zip people up in a suitcase and kill them.
Well, she fell
Sorry.
asleep. She fell asleep.
Who did? No,
Sarah
she
Boone.
didn't fall asleep. She hit his hand with a bat.
Well, that was before she fell asleep.
No, but she knew. That was like
That
I
hand
think
coming
that's
out,
scripted.
that hand coming out.
I think that made it premeditated murder. Is what
I
I
know,
think.
that made it worse. It made it worse.
Bonk. Ah! I see your fingers. Bonk. Oh, zip. I'm tired. I'm gonna go sleep.
All right.
Sleepy.
Then get
All right.
back to it, babe.
Okay. Back to the case that is not so readily apparent. A true whodunit in my book. All right. Okay, so then we're getting close to the end of the cross here. So he says, he says, look, there was a 5-year period. All right. So the crime takes place in 2017, and you finally get the weapon in 2022. And frankly, any kind of tool that you analyze in your firearms analysis can make a different type of mark over time, meaning from use. Meaning you have no idea how much this gun was fired over the past 5 years, do you? She says, no, I have no idea. He's like, and the fact is that does change, correct? The tools can change over time. And then she's like, yeah, it's tools may have changed over time. Yes. She's like, there's been studies. They've done the 10,000 shot study to see how much the tools have changed. And she's like, there's some studies out there. He's like, okay, but the bottom line is you have zero idea how many times this weapon's been fired. You have no idea whatsoever. And therefore you can't tell us whether or not these tool markings have changed. She's like, well, I kind of can. Say, because if they had changed, I wouldn't have been able to find sufficient agreement. All right. I guess Allie didn't find that all that interesting.
Sorry, our daughter texted me.
Okay, so she says, he says you would expect quality tools to make the same type of marks 5 years later, right? Like in Sig Sauers are quality weapons. You would say, like, he started it with that whole conversation. Like Sig Sauer is like world renowned as being a quality weapon, right? Law enforcement uses it. Like it's a weapon that people trust. They know that they're well made. And she says it's a popular model. It's a popular brand. And he says, so you would expect quality tools to make the same marks 5 years later, right? He says, yet on your test, when you cycled those rounds through that weapon, it did not make sufficient marks, not sufficient enough to test. Isn't that true? So that was like a good point. He's like kind of hammering
when was
home.
the gun purchased, though?
I think 2001. It was either manufactured or purchased in 2001, and he's the only owner.
All right.
Okay, so again, your significant tools with respect to your analysis were the extractor, the barrel, and the ejector. Okay, as far as you could not exclude the examined ejector for a subclass, right? For subclass characteristics, they were not significant, all right? So you could not exclude the weapon. So you could not exclude it for subclass. I can't read this goddamn word I wrote. Extractor for subclass characteristics either. He says, are there peer review articles on the chamber face markings? Like, and after a really long, like, back and forth with her, she just won't answer the question. He's like, it's a yes or no answer. And she keeps coming up with these really long explanations. He's like, are there peer review articles on chamber face markings? She finally says no. She's like, well, they talk about it, but not directly. It went on forever.
So she finally admitted there are no markings on a chamber face.
He said that's not even a thing. He's like, there's not even a peer review article on chamber face markings. And again, the chamber face is the very beginning of the barrel. It's like right where the barrel starts. It's like one piece. And the chamber face is, again, that little archway. So he's like, all right, so you get the microscopic image times 60. this picture, we got the test fired hairline with the 16, and he says, that at the end of the day, he's like, in terms of these photos, in terms of you being able to allow the jury to look at your work, I mean, the photo is a representation of your work, isn't it? No, like the jury, when Luttrull was trying to keep the jury from being able to look at those pictures, was like looking at him like they were looking at each other like, what is going on? Like, what? Like, we can't look at the picture. I think that really damaged them in terms of the state. Like, this whole thing with them not being able to look at the pictures, of her saying that I don't want them to look at the pictures because
They're gonna
they're
see
not
my shit's fucked up.
they're not trained to do this, and they're just going to be looking at it, and they may say, oh well, I don't think they match, and that's not what my work is. That's not what, like, that picture is just me memorializing a part of my process. That's it. So there was quite a battle there.
But it doesn't make any sense what she's saying then. What the hell? She said her process was to compare the marks.
I mean, she went through a process, but them's just words. You know what I mean? It's like, like I'm saying, like at the end of the day, and Rozzi says it. So at the end of the day, what you're telling this jury is that we just got to trust you. Like, we don't get to look like there's no videotape that follows everything that you did. Like, why don't you have like some kind of GoPro on so we can see everything that you're seeing as you're doing your testing and you're talking about it, like the same way that, like, when a lot of forensic pathologists do, they pull the recording down and they guide you through it. I'm now cutting open the spleen. I've now dissected the spleen and I'm now weighing it in the scale, like that kind of thing. Like, do something like that. Doesn't exist here. It's like her getting up in the stand, saying a bunch of words. Just believe what I'm telling you. That's it. You don't need to see it. Just trust me. I know what I've never been wrong in 17 years ever, on a proficiency test. All right. So Luttrull stands up. He's like, the photograph itself will only show what's in the photo, and it doesn't show everything that she saw and everything that she took into account.
I don't understand. Can you please tell me what else she saw and took into account?
All the stuff, all the things. She saw stuff and things.
All
I mean,
right.
no, I can't. I like if it's not in my notes, she didn't say it. Like, take very thorough notes.
Well,
So then finally he asks, is it okay for the jurors to use your work product? Meaning the point in time where you decided to memorialize what you were doing, are they allowed to use that? And she says yes. She said, in Image KK, this is where you say that there's sufficient agreement between the two, between 16 and your test round that was fired through the weapon. So he's going back to the exhibit. So LL, he's like, it's another shot of that MM, and these are the defense's demonstrative evidence of the photographs that were in the slideshow. That I don't remember Luttrull asking to have those photographs. I don't think he entered those photographs into evidence and have them published to the jury. I think it was only the defense. Like, the defense is like, here, we want you to look at these, but the state doesn't want you to look at them. It's not a good look. Like, I mean, I can kind of understand what she's saying in terms of, like, you get a bunch of people like you and me who don't know shit about tool marks. I'm like, this shit don't match.
but she should be able to point to something. Here is what I saw. And this is important, even though this might look different to you. The part of this that shows us that this is a sufficient agreement is this little side right here. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm sure the defense's expert's going to do it.
Yeah, no, and it's like, it's just strange. I mean, because she's done it for a long time, and she's very bright. Like, there's no question she knows what's, like, it's the question of not whether or not she has the competency to do this. The question is they're hiding the results and not allowing the jury to look at them, and they're only allowing her to give her final opinion. And that's all it is. It's a subjective opinion that she feels there's sufficient agreement between the test round and the round that was found at the scene. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, look, maybe the jury's going to give it a ton of weight. Maybe they struck, like, hit a home run with it. I don't know. I mean, I was sitting in the courtroom. I'm a lawyer. I've been doing this a long time. Again, I'm a defense attorney though. So like, I'm going to look at it through a defense attorney's lens. I can't help it. But I was asking other people that weren't defense attorneys. I'm like, so powerful or not powerful? And most people were like, I fell asleep like inside of my head like 3 hours ago. I don't even know what the hell they were saying. It was like a typical expert witness. It just went on forever. And it all that matters is it's going to wait. Like, the judge is going to give him the instruction. It's going to go to weight. You give it whatever weight you think it deserves. And at the end of the day, the defense got their pictures in. So, I mean, they're going to be able to look at them, but like, if Luttrull, like, once Luttrull knew that, it seemed like, because it made it seem like they were trying to hide something. Like, Luttrull was really fighting on not getting the jury to be able to look at the pictures. It was strange. And again, she restrated. I literally wrote I wrote that right here. If you can read can you read it?
Luttrull is something the ball. Hiding the ball.
Hiding the ball. I said, I don't use, so she restates that I just want to make clear, I do not use these photos to make a determination as to whether or not there is sufficient agreement. I do not use photos ever. I only use what I see with my eyes. And all that I'm doing when I'm taking a photograph is memorializing my work. Like, she's like, I see more, like, things are moving. I'm moving the microscope around. Like, you know what I mean? There's some truth to that. I mean, like,
I know, but what she should be able to give us a microscopic image.
she did give microscopic images, but what she's saying is that's just a moment in time, that this is a fluid situation, that she's examining this thing. She's moving it around. She's looking at it from different angles. She's checking it from all viewpoints. And like, this one picture is not sufficient to relay what she saw with her eyes when she was doing the examination.
Well, one picture isn't, but what about a bunch of pictures?
I don't know that that's going to do it in her mind either. All right. So then he says, you could not exclude subclass characteristics, could you? And she just doesn't give a direct answer to that. And remember, like, you need to be able to exclude just class characteristics, which, again, like, if you're talking about a motor vehicle, talking about I want to buy a sedan. You walk onto a car lot. This is the hypo she gave. And you see an SUV, okay, well, I can exclude that because that's not the right class. It's not a sedan. It's a SUV. If you see a pickup truck, you say, okay, I can exclude that. It's a pickup truck. It's not a sedan. She's like, so that kind of characteristic, like, everything has it. It doesn't help narrow the field. And same with subclass stuff. Like, you can't, like, it's a little more helpful than just a class characteristic, but it's nowhere near as helpful as individual characteristics. So he says, you stated on October 17th through the 19th that you were present when your boss did his verification. So, which is kind of shitty, because she said she emailed him. It's like, oh, I need you to verify this. And then he comes down and he verifies it right by her. And he's like, and that verification didn't take very long, did it? He's like, you took a couple days, right? 2-3 days to do this. She's like, yeah. I think it was 2 days, and then I wanted it verified on the third day. He's like, "It's what?" He's like, "How long did his verification take?" She's like, "I don't know, an hour or two." And then he asked her, "Have you done verifications?" She's like, "Yes, I have." "And have you come to different conclusions on occasion?" She says, "Yes, I have." And he says, "So really, with your kind of entire uh, discipline here, when you get down to brass tacks, it's an individual discernment. There's subjectivity in your determinations as to whether or not there's sufficient agreement. Isn't that true?" She's like, "Yes." And she's like, But there's subjectivity in everything, even even when you're being objective, there's still subjectivity in it." So he says that, and then he says, "Okay." He's like, "But in your discipline, in your field, two examiners, two completely different people can look at the exact same thing, and they can reach two different conclusions, can't they?" And she said, "Yes, they can." So then Rozzi admits, he gets exhibits Q through V admitted and published to the jury. He also gets W, and he said that this is the request form. That was 3 pages, and he said that it's also got a picture of the Glock, one of the Glocks. So the Glock that was tested in February of 2017, and that's published to the jury. X got admitted and published, which I, some reason, didn't write down what it was. Y was the certificate of, so X X was the X was obviously the firearm examination worksheet for the Glock that was admitted and published, and then Y was her certificate of analysis that was admitted and published, and then 90 from 090, which was the Smith and Wesson model MD, which was another one of the original few guns that were tested early on. And then BB, her firearm examination worksheet, was admitted and published to the jury. And then 101, the Sig Sauer from Weber's farm, the gun that they picked up, I think the day of, it was a Sig, which could not be excluded. It was not found to be sufficient agreement, but she couldn't exclude it. And then 101, the CC is the firearm examination worksheet of 101. And then DD is the certificate of analysis of both 090 and 101, which is the Smith and Wesson and the Sig Sauer that were tested in February of 2017. So then he asks her about this thing. He's like, "So have you heard of CMS?" He's like, "Do you know what that means?" And she says, "Yeah, I know what it means." And she's like, he's like, "So what is it?" She says, "It's consecutive matching striations." She's like, "That's a thing where he's like, and that's kind of where your field is evolving to. That's an evolving process in your discipline, isn't it?" And she says, "There's a lot of people that use it." And he's like, and as a matter of fact, PCAST has said that the CMS is what people should start using because it's more reliable. That there's an objective way to score the analysis as opposed to subjectivity. She says, "Well, there's still subjectivity in it." He's like, "But PCAST, they think that this is the way to go. This is and there's a lot of studies out here that this is the way to do it." And he said, so this is where he sets up his trap for CMS after he kind of gives this is a little foreshadowing. If this were a movie, Rozzi did a little foreshadowing here. We know now that his expert is definitely going to be using the most up-to-date techniques, which is consecutive matching striations. So we're going to get the full explanation what that is. And so he says, she said in that, in that particular field that you can observe photographs because you're counting striations. It's like line counting, she said. He said, but okay, fair enough. He's like, are you real familiar with it? And she's like, no, I'm not really. He's like, so is it safe to say that you would defer to someone who was more experienced in CMS analysis? And she says, yes. And then he leaves it. So we could be guaranteed that their expert, their firearms expert, is going to definitely be using a different technique. So he says, and he's getting ready to wrap it up here. He's like, all right, so you did not provide the articles which you relied on in reaching your conclusion to me, even though I requested them. And I requested all your full work. You did not give those to me. She says, no, I did not. He said, did you refer to these articles prior to your analysis? Meaning, did you look at them prior to you getting on the microscope and looking? She's like, what do you mean? She's like, did you read these articles? She's like, well, I've had these forever. He's like, that's not what I'm asking you. What I'm asking you is right before you were going to do this examination of an unspent casing being ejected, not cycled through and fired through the weapon, but ejected, which you've done maybe once in your career. Did you read these articles prior to your analysis? And then she says, yes, I did. Okay, so he says, so in terms of, so then he talks a little bit about, because like Allie had read you about that there was like a 2.37 false negatives and then like 2.73 false positives. And he says, but the reality is those numbers are skewed because those numbers don't actually include an option that people have, that analysts have during these proficiency tests, to opt out. Like if it's too close to call, if they find it inconclusive, because it's either exclusion, inconclusive, or sufficient agreement. Like those are the three choices that you have as an analyst. Exclusion, it's excluded. That's not the weapon. That's not the weapon that fired this gun. Inconclusive or sufficient agreement. And so what's happening in terms of these numbers that you're representing to this jury, that, wow, 98% of the time they get it right, but that those aren't including the cases where it's too close to call and that they opt out because it's inconclusive because they don't want to get it wrong. So those numbers are disingenuous in a way because they're not. She's like, that's a huge debate in our camps. She's like, that is like, that's something like like that everybody's arguing about, whether or not they should be including inconclusives in there, not allowing people to opt out. Because he's like, well, because that number is more like, if you include the inconclusives, that's 30%. And he's like, frankly, when you're dealing with a burden like beyond a reasonable doubt, if it's inconclusive, you should just be saying it's excluded rather than even, you should never be saying it's sufficient agreement if you're inconclusive, right? I mean, like you never should be landing there. So if that's the case, it should just be counted as an exclusion. It should be counted as, so, I mean, he made a pretty good point because those numbers are, it's like, 2.37 and 2.7, whatever, 6 like percent, false negatives and false positives, that's like, oh, wow, they're right all the time. And, they only get it wrong where they say that there was sufficient agreement when it wasn't, only like 2% of the time, so it's like, he did it, like you missed it and I'm not repeating it, but
I was listening while I was.
Oh, okay, cool. So, all right. So then, and then like a couple of the last thing he says, so, and it's like at the end of the day, I mean, PCAST, they said that this wasn't even a science, and like Luttrull lost his shit. He's like, you're misquoting what they said. They didn't say it wasn't a science. They questioned whether or not it's a science.
Is that what he said? They questioned whether or not it's a science.
Yeah, he was like, they didn't say it wasn't a science, so it's like.
But he admitted that they questioned whether it was a science.
They did question because he read the name of the article like Rozzi did during his cross. So like that's what they say. Is this even a science? It's like that's the name of the article. And Gull did give Rozzi. She's like, don't like paraphrase what the thing said. Don't do that. He's like, I'm sorry, Your Honor. Sorry. So sorry.
Is this? Oh my God!
Total Bob move. It's a total Bob move.
It's close enough.
I mean, that's basically what they're saying. It was a hypothetical. It was a question. Okay, so then it's redirect.
They will have
He's
their
like,
own
he says,
expert.
when you left your job, it was in good standing, right? He says, what was your title? She says, I was a forensic scientist one.
One.
Like, ooh, wow. And he says, in your, like, the ISP decided that they didn't want to be taking the easier exams. You guys actually decided that you wanted the more stringent proficiency exams, right? Because you wanted to be tested by the toughest stuff out there, right? And she's like, yes. So, and then he says, subclass characteristics. Just because those exist, they do not exclude individual characteristics, right? You can still have subclass characteristics and individual characteristics, right? She said, yes, you can have both. Let's see. Then he says, I don't know if this is recross. I think this is recross. Oh no, this is still his direct. He said, as far as the four weapons, that the SIG 239-40 and the Glock and the Smith & Wesson that came in that you made comparisons to, but you could not exclude back in February of 2017. Now that you have Richard Allen's gun and you were able to make that comparison, would you be able to exclude all three of those weapons? And she said, well, I would have been able to exclude the Glock and the Smith & Wesson, yes, but not the SIG.
Wait, what? This was, you said redirect or still cross?
This is redirect. Remember, you're wanting to exclude things.
Right.
So Luttrull asked, those weapons that you couldn't exclude back then because you didn't have Rick Allen's gun, now that you have Rick Allen's gun, would you have been able to exclude the Glock? She says yes. And I would have been able to exclude the Smith & Wesson, yes, but not the SIG. Now, like Rozzi did something weird. And I think he said that he's like, oh, so you said that you excluded all the weapons now, but like she did. And I'm like 99% certain that she said she could not exclude the SIG, which is the one
I don't understand how Richard Allen's gun changes whether she can exclude or not these other guns. Am I just thick?
No, I don't know.
I mean, I might be thick when it comes to these guns, but that just doesn't make any sense to me.
And so, and then he finishes it up with he said, you saw some individual characteristics on all three tools, didn't you? And she said yes. So then it was jury question time. And then, so they asked a couple, like, there were so many of them. She reads them so fast. So the first one was,
I'm going to remind you again, just at the end, sit at the back with Lee and Andrea when they're doing that.
Lee didn't get shit down. Lee can't hear a word in her. Like
Okay.
Lee, like I told you, Lee's like,
like I joined them, then sat and went, just sit with everybody and go over it at the end like they're doing.
Oh, I had shit to do, bro. Like I had to make it to the rental car place by 6 or I'm not coming home tomorrow. So
all right, well, we want that.
An option to sit in the back and exchange notes. And frankly, like all day in there, like you did a half day. Like you're not living my life right now, man.
No.
It's
Half
like,
day was fine.
I'm up at 7 o'clock. I'm showering, driving out there half an hour, going in all day in court, coming home, getting on the live, trying to find time to eat. Jury question. So would force by which a person cycled around change the depth of a marking? What a great question. Such a good
Repeat it.
Would the force by which a round is cycled, meaning like how hard they rack it,
Right.
instead of like ching, and she says, yeah, it could very well, it could
How
very
hard
well
did you
change.
do it?
So then, and I explained to everybody the way that it works with these jury questions. They submit, judge says, all right, calls up the lawyers. They all go back into the corner. They turn on the white noise. They talk about it. They make sure that it's, allowable. They're allowable under Indiana law. They discuss it a little bit, and then she comes back. She reads them, and then the witness answers, and then she gives each attorney to ask follow-up questions. So she says, yes, that does affect the depth of markings. And so Rozzie's question, can you make sure every time that you cycle a weapon that you're using the same force? And she's like, no, there's no way. So the next question, could marks on the sidewall have been caused by any other extraneous factors? So like she had one thing that she had like a little gray arrow to that she didn't know where it came from. And she's like, there's no way to determine that. He's like, so another question was, does she know if 315 and 16, so 315 is the Hope box round, the Winchester round, and 16 is the round found at the scene. Do you know if those are from the same lot of ammunition? She said, no, I have no clue. There's no way to know.
I think there is a way to know, though, isn't there?
I don't
Somebody who knows guns, tell us if there is a way to know.
I think maybe if it was still in the box.
Hmm.
I don't know. Like there's not going to be any individual marking on the head stamp that says that it was in lot, at least that I know. Like if there was something that said what lot it came from, then she would have answered yes.
Yeah, I guess so.
So another good question, could disassembly and cleaning cause change of the tools? And she said, yes, it could. It's like how much cleaning and disassembly is unknown, but it could cause it. Could firing the weapon an extensive amount of times cause change in the tool? She said yes. And he said, what did the studies show in terms of tools that are persistent, or how long tools will persist without change? And she said that there's, they've done studies, they're always trying to figure out, and there's really no way to know how and when the change occurs. Like there is no like magic number, like, oh, after 7,500 cycles, the ejector is going to change the way it looks on the pin, when it hits. And she said there's also lots of external factors that can affect it as well. And so somebody asked, was there a comparison made between the Hope box round and 16? What a great question. Like, I couldn't believe that wasn't asked. Like, so they're talking about the round that was found in the box and then the round that was found at the scene. And she said, yes, there was. And so the follow-up question was, what was the result? And she said that it was missing an ejector round or injector mark. The ejector mark was the most prominent thing. So like what she's saying is a comparison. Like when I say comparison, it's not just picking them up and seeing if there's anybody. What I'm saying is that she cycled the round that they found in the box at Richard Allen's home, cycled it through, had it eject,
ejector mark.
And it said that it when it came out, it was missing the ejector mark. It didn't have the ejector mark. And he said, but the ejector, and then Rozzie's like, but the ejector mark was the most prominent mark on the bullet found at the scene. It was the most prominent mark found at the bullet on the scene.
Who asked that? McClelland?
No, Rozzi did.
Oh, I was gonna say,
Right,
that's
Brody and
crazy.
Flip and say McClellan.
I don't know, maybe I just heard it wrong.
Uh, and her answer was yes, it was the most prominent mark.
I mean, that's what I'm hearing, Kraken. That's what I'm hearing, not his gun.
Okay,
Uh,
so
sounds like
then
not his
somebody,
gun.
so they said, was the metal used on the test rounds the same as the one on the on 16? And she says, I don't know. I don't know what the metals were. You know, because they do use different metals.
What do you mean?
Um,
I'm confused. What metals? The metals of
the
the gun
metals
of the
from
bullet?
the test rounds were like, did she make sure that they were all the same type of metal that was used on, you know,
And
that
she
was
said no, 'cause she
the
doesn't
wind.
know?
She says she didn't test all the metals. You know, I mean, it's like, but I think she's talking more about the projectile. Like, because the projectile could be made out of many different types of.
Right, but for your little test here, you wanted to test it on the same metal,
Well,
right?
she didn't do shit, any kind of testing on that stuff. We know that. So she certainly wasn't trying to figure out if it was all the same metal. If she didn't even look at them microscopically before she used them. Okay, so then somebody like, so there's a dude that's in the middle row that always asks like super brilliant questions. Like, we got a really, really smart dude on the jury. His questions are always like, because you always can tell like who's sending in the questions, you know? And like, because you'll see him pass them. Like, you don't necessarily know, but in like this situation, there were two people that sent questions. So I was I was able, like, and I saw him smile when they read one of his questions because it like it's
Where does
like,
he sit?
huh?
Is it the
Back
upper
row, middle seat.
Oh, he's got I can't describe what he
Right,
looks like.
right.
Okay. But
Okay.
he's like 3 down from the guy on the end that takes a lot of notes.
Yes. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so as far as the black box studies, how do these percentages of false positives and false negatives affect the performance of the examiners? Meaning, like, does it cause them to? She's like, well, the reality is that she goes into kind of this long explanation about how on proficiency tests that everyone knows they're being tested, so they're working really hard not to screw up. She's like, it's not an accurate way to like tell how good we are at doing what we do. She's like, really, what they need to do is they need to be doing the testing without us knowing we're being tested to see how proficient we really are on a
Right.
daily basis, which
Right.
is a very honest answer and a good answer. Um, and she said that they're starting to use a 5-point scale as opposed to a 3-point scale. And she said also that in black box studies that there's no firearm that's provided. It's literally you're just comparing cartridge to cartridge. And that's where she goes on to say they're double blind studies. The people taking the test don't know the answers, and the administrator, the person administering the test don't know the answers as well. Um, and then they asked another question about how the false positive. It was almost the same question as the other guy asked. How's the false positive, false negative affect the efficiency of the results? And he's like, how does that translate to use in the field? And she gave basically the same answer. You know, she's like, the thing about it is this like, it appears that there's like one group of people that are always screwing up that are causing this 2.87 false positive. Like she's like it's not widespread. It's like always this cluster of the same people. I'm like, really?
Well,
It's weird.
then maybe those people need to go because their percentage should be really high, right?
Yeah. Um, so then somebody asked uh what their lab's standards are, and she really didn't like give a real answer for it. You know, she was just like, "Oh, well, we follow, we're a certified lab, and we follow our guidelines." Just like a super generic thing. Um, and then I think Rozzi has to follow up. He's like, but your lab doesn't use CSM, right? I like that's how it
That's the
that was
CSM is what again?
it's the new. It's the shit that like you missed it. Like you had walked away or you were off camera. So that's consecutive marking striations, and it's the evolution of this
Okay.
discipline. And what I was saying is like he asked a question. Since you've never used it and you don't use it and your lab doesn't use it, would you defer to somebody that's more experienced in CMS analysis? And she said, yes, I'd have to. So
That
we
must
now
be
know
right.
that's right. It's
They're experts.
foreshadowing. They're experts, definitely CMS guy. So that's it, y'all. That's day
Wow.
7 in the books. That's it.
That was a good question to end on then.
Yeah, it was
All
good.
right. Well, got some
Rosie did a
questions.
really good job with this cross. I mean, and it's like it's tough to cross experts. Like that's why lawyers not only do they retain experts to testify on their behalf, but they also retain experts to teach them the things that they need to know to give them questions to ask when they're cross-examining the state's expert or vice versa. So, all right. So that was awesome. It was a great day.
Robbie wants to know, did the witness say if she was able to duplicate the chambering marks? And that answer was no, right?
No, she could not. She could not.
Thanks, Dawn. I think I mentioned that earlier. Oh, that's 20. Dawn gifted 20 memberships today.
What? Dang.
Kraken's with her mom. Thanks, Kraken. She's got her up to
All right.
speed on this.
Speaking of which, all right, I owe some thank yous. Like I hadn't looked at my PayPal in forever, and like I never get the notification. I've definitely got some thank yous, and I hope they're here, or I hope they check back in. So all the way back on October 15th, Brenda K had PayPal'd $25. Thank you very much, Brenda. Tavon K on October 16th, and then on the 24th. 25 and 25. Thank you so much for that generosity. Jerusha White, Jerusha W on October 19th, $10 holla. Appreciate you so much. Wendell, $50 holla on October 22nd. Just says Bob and Allie. Thank you so much, Wendell. Michelle on October 23rd. Like I feel such a jerk when I saw this. Like supported us with $100 holla.
Wow. You have to
Wow.
thank Michelle on a couple lives.
Michelle,
to
yeah,
make up for that.
I sent her a message on
Probably
PayPal.
like, I will
Definitely
never.
would shut you out. She's like, I'm never sending that fool any money again. So, but thank you so much. It's incredibly generous, Michelle. Thank you a million times over. Margaret Foster, I keep saying your last name. I'm sorry, I don't mean to dox you by saying your last name, y'all. It's just kind of habit to read a name. Margaret F on the 24th of October, she supported us with $50 on PayPal. Thank you so much for that. Brucenta, $5 holla. Go get chocolate Coke at the sandwich shop. It's got to be she's got to be local. She knows. Sandwich shop is great. I ate over there the other day. And then Tavon came in again with another $25 holla on the 24th of October. So thank you guys so much for that activity over on PayPal. I real quick want to throw some love out. We got some love. Jolene H threw 20 at us on Venmo. Thank you very much. Defense Diary rules. Love you guys. Thank you, Jolene. We love you back. Kelly H paid us $13. Love Defense Diaries. Your legal insight and dynamic as a couple make you my favorite law tubers. Thank you so much, Kelly. And Fabiola just came through right like 8 minutes ago with a $20 lunch. Thank you so much. I use that too. You guys truly. So
Mark Pfeiffer says that there was a black upgrade on the factory wheels in 2016.
really,
Yep.
I mean, he bought it new. That makes sense.
Yep. If Bridge Guy was right behind Abby following them, why isn't Bridge Guy in the picture of Abby on the bridge? The bridge is long. So did he catch up fast? So you've looked at the new video and you said he was much closer than you thought, right?
Yeah, I'd say like 20, maybe 15 feet, maybe. 20 feet maybe. Oh, yeah, he looks substantially closer. But like when they're showing it, it looks like it's like they catch a second shot of him and he's closed the gap. You know what I'm saying? Like he's much closer. So I think it's from that closer pictures where they took the little, like whatever, 1.5 second, 2 second, like him walking thing. Okay.
So, underachiever, why the hell would an additional firearm be tested to show if the striations or lines differ from each weapon? Good point. Very, very good point. Amista wants to know, would the manufacturing process from certain marks on any given gun that would then create similar ejected bullet markings across the board, as in all guns of the same model made in a particular facility? We don't know the answer to it.
Like, so Amista, that's exactly what Allie and I were saying. I don't know if you're late. It's like theoretically, yes, because they're all machine made now. Like in the term that they use for that is consecutively made. All right. Like that, because that's what I've always been saying. Like back in the old days when they used to hand make barrels, you'd get all kinds of different defects and all kinds of different things in there that would create almost like a fingerprint kind of individuality for each barrel because they were all different. Now that they're all consecutively made, and the one thing that she was saying about what she learned about the SIG plant is that they're I forget which thing it was. It was in the part that you were reading that there's a double cut, which means that it's not consecutive. Do you remember reading something about a double cut?
I don't, but I've got it up right now.
Okay, so she said she read an article that with respect to, I think it was that when they're making the chamber face, that there's two cuts that occur that are not consecutive. So meaning it's like there's two different cuts, so that makes it so it's not like cut, cut, cut. It's like cut, 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 cut. So she says that the barrels are not consecutively cut. Consecutively made items are more relatable, meaning that they're just similar. They're more similar. So, but two cutting heads, and she said that there's 6 CNC milling machines, 2 heads apiece, 12 cutting machines. So she says that those marks can result in individual characteristics. She didn't say they did, but they could. But the problem for her is that the chamber face didn't really leave any kind of substantial mark. So, and what Amista was asking is like, yeah, like that's what we want. Like that's a point. Like why weren't they testing it against a bunch of like the exact same model SIG made in the same year? And like see if she's able to identify like using all those different guns or seeing if they're all identical. I mean, it's either they're all identical because they're all made the exact same way. So everybody that has a SIG, Sauer, that model number, their marks are going to look the exact same as Richard Allen's marks did, which gives it no value, especially in a gun-toting state like Indiana. I love the guns here. So, all right. Did Allie go through all the questions, or there's still more questions? Andrew James, I don't know if we answered this. Did you see if the Winchester bullet from Aria's keepsake box is the same? I think we did answer that one. Did you see if the Winchester bullet from Aria's keepsake box is the same model as the one at the scene? Yeah, they were both Winchester 40 caliber Smith & Wesson. So they can't tell if they're from the same lot, but it's the same manufacturer being Winchester and it's the same caliber. And it's used in the same, it's the same like model. It's Smith & Wesson. So they were the same. She did a comparison You know, she ran that one. She ejected that one too, the one that was found in the Hope box or whatever, and it didn't leave when she ejected it through. It didn't leave an ejection mark that she could use to compare. Like that's the thing. It's like she used. Oh, I told you guys I don't need to belabor the point. Thank you so much for that $10 Andrew. The first ish Noel Bob were all the rounds she compared at least the same type of young, like all fiddle metal jacket to all hollow points. We don't know. We don't know. She didn't give any she didn't discern at all in terms of what her test rounds are, and she didn't look at them microscopically. So the answer is we don't know. Thank you for the $5 holla.
I just came on to say I've got to go. I got to deal with
I love you. I love you. I
household
miss
stuff.
you. I can't wait
I
to see
love you. I miss you. I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes, I'm excited. I'm excited to see you and my kids.
All right. Call me when you're off,
Cam,
babe.
Cam's coming to Great
She
America,
is.
right? Awesome.
And our oldest is meeting us over there.
Oh, awesome. I
Yep.
get my 3 girls. I love it. My 4 girls, including my beautiful wife. All right. I love you. I can't
All
wait to
right.
kiss you and hug you.
Bye, all. Thanks for everything.
All right. Bye, babe. True crime junkie. Is it RA? What did I hear about wet guns? Oh, so yeah, they did some testing. She tested a bunch of she was sent. Allie should have gone through that earlier. Like we broke this up into 2, True Crime Junkie. Allie did the early portion, and that was early morning. So she had multiple submissions, meaning that law enforcement dropped a bunch of different submissions over. One of them had 3 guns that had either been found in water. And so she went through the process of trying to dry them out, clean them out, and make them operable again. None of she couldn't get any of them to operate in a way that was meaningful for her to be able to make any kind of examinations. And they weren't like guns that were found necessarily that we know of in like Deer Creek or anything like that. So I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. That was the white gun thing. Let's see if we got any other questions. Screams mistrial to me. Nah, this thing's going all the way. It's going all the way. All right. Let me see. Question. Was the 4 gun from okay. I don't know if I missed it, but was the 4 guns from Wabash River was said. So I don't know that they said they were from the Wabash. They might have been. They could have been Wabash Rivers. It could have been like they pulled them out. And, during the Kagan Klein search, they found a bunch of guns in there. I mean, where people are dumping their shit, obviously. So I think I just answered that, Amanda. She tried her best to get those things operable, but it was a no-go. All right, let's see. Mista, we answered that one. $1 million question, underachiever. Why the hell wouldn't an additional firearm be tested to show off the striations? So we're not really dealing with striations here because this thing didn't cycle through the barrel, though. There is no this wasn't a fired round. Striations you're going to see more with rounds that have been fired. All right. If Bridge Guy was right behind Abby following them, why isn't Bridge Guy in the picture of Abby on the bridge? I don't know. It seems like he kind of just appeared out of nowhere because there was not much time between. But remember, that picture of Abby on the bridge alone was not on Libby's phone. They could not find it in the Snapchat cache at all. And that's when the defense, Ajay, asked, considering that you did not find that photograph anywhere, not in her camera roll, not in the Snapchat cache, and not in anywhere in the Knowledge C database, which does not keep photographs, but it would keep metadata about the photograph, I would imagine. Isn't it possible that somebody else logged into Libby's account and posted that? And I mean, the answer had to be, it's possible. Somebody posted it. And it's inexplicable because they found every other photograph that Libby took on Snap. They were all in the cache. except for that one. So it's weird. Okay. Thank you for the question. I am Sam. Mark, was there a black upgrade option for the factory? Oh, there was a black. Oh, so Allie said that. Yeah, interesting, man. That's interesting. I mean, you had to know that that thing was like, that was like an option when you bought the car because he bought it new, or they bought it new. Kathy and Rick did. Kraken, my mom is visiting, just spent 6 hours getting up to speed, and she is floored about this case. Keep up the great work, keeping us informed. Thank you so much. Appreciate you always, Kraken. Robin, did the witnesses say if she was able to duplicate the chambering marks? So I think we answered this. She was not. She was not. Like, I don't know if Allie started at the top or not. Did anyone ever check Bridge Guy's height in relation to known Bridge member? No, and it drives me insane. Like, I'm like, there's got to be somebody in the world that can like look at the ties and the rails and figure out, like, do some geometry and figure out exactly how tall this dude was. Like, we said it, like, really? So yeah, no, not thus far. We have not seen any evidence of that come in at all, that anybody's done that. All right, so Dawn Burke gifted 10 DD memberships. Always giver. We love you. We love you so much. You did it again. Came 2 times with a lot of heat. We appreciate the hell out of you, Dawn. TJ with the $4.99 super sticker. We appreciate the hell out of you, TJ. Thank you very much. AZ gifted 10 DD memberships. All the family hugs from all you guys. And then another 5, so 15 total. Thank you so much, A to Z. We love you. Love seeing you in here. We love seeing new members too. Annie, thank you so much for becoming a member. Family hug. A lot of new family members tonight. Love that. I love that. Who's your girl? $10 holla. Doggone money. Love it. Thank you so much. Who's your girl? We appreciate you. K-Dog, $2 for the pup. Love it. And the Nook thanks you. I can't wait to see my dog too. Poor guy. I miss him so much. Might bring him back with me. I should ask my benefactors if Rachel and Ryan, if they'll let me bring my dog. They'll probably be like, yeah. Take him on nice walks by the river. Love it. Majesta, $4, $5 holla. Appreciate you so much, Majesta. Thank you so much. Michelle B, new member. Family hug. Welcome. It screams mistrial. I don't think so. This is going the distance. It's going the distance. It's going full speed. But thank you so much for that $2 holla. Andrew, once again, thank you for the $10 holla. The first is Noel. Thank you for that $5 holla. True Crime Junkie came back. Is it RA? Thank you for that $5 holla. Debbie gifted 5 DD memberships. Appreciate you so much. JD, did the jury seem to be following all the bullet stuff? They did. I'm telling you, this jury's legit. Like, I have not seen any yawning, snoozing, like sitting there like this. They all have their notes. They're all really, really, really involved in the case in terms of they are listening to the evidence. They're listening to the witnesses. They're super attentive, which is what you want all the time. All right, Annie, $5 holla. Kathy Allen would know if Bridge Guy was her husband and if it sounded like him. Has she said anything to the effect that that is not my husband? Yes. She's adamant that it's not him. Like, she's 100% in support of him. Like, it's not there as like, she's not there as like a prop. Like, she's there because she believes that it's not her husband. But they're not privy to any evidence. Like, not like the victims' families aren't privy. Like, no one, like everyone affected in this case that is not involved with trying it, meaning the lawyers and law enforcement, have no idea what the evidence is. None. That's so sweet. Dr. Vonda, Wendell is my hubby. And tell Allie we appreciate you both. That's so wonderful. Thank you, Wendell. Appreciate that. It's so wonderful. And thank you, Dr. Vonda. We love you. All right, y'all. It's been fun. It's been interesting. Tomorrow, the word on the street, McClellan let slip that they're supposed to be putting a DNA person on. I'm assuming they're just going to come on and say that we tested this, this, and this, and none of it came back with any kind of profile relating to Richard Allen. Like, I'm curious about the hair. I don't know if we got hair result. The hair around Abby's finger. I don't know if we got a result on that. And then it's going to be whoever's going to handle the DNA side of it, asking, okay, well, you didn't test this, and this, did you? When why? Why didn't you test the Jimmy John's cup and the straw? Why didn't you test the, the energy drink thing? Why didn't you test this? Why didn't you test that? So, but I'm going to do a quick live tomorrow. I'm not going to leave you all hanging on a Saturday. Allie said that Great America doesn't open till 5. So that gives me time to jump in the car, drive over here, give you all a quick primer on what happened, give you the deets, and then I'm out. Spend a day and a half with my family. So I look forward to it. So you guys rock. You're the best. I love you so much. You guys are so great. Please make sure that you share, subscribe, and like on the way out. It helps get us. If you're on replay crew, chat it up. That gets it out there too. That absolutely gets it out there. So remember, share, subscribe, and like all the things that YouTube loves when you guys do. And they're all free. And if you really love us, become a member because we love having you guys. All right, guys. I wish you all a wonderful evening. And just remember, without y'all, I'm just an old man talking about a bunch of cases. Talk to you tomorrow.